These are the stories of 10 of the greatest paintings in the world. I'm Andrew Marr. Art, not politics, is the great passion of my life. For me, it gets to the heart of what it is to be human. In galleries across the globe, there are great paintings, works made with almost supernatural skill, fierce passion, and extraordinary brain power. Now I want to tell stories behind some of the most iconic images in history, pictures like Leonardo's Mona Lisa, Van Gogh's Sunflowers, and Turner's Fighting Temeraire, paintings that represent the pinnacle of what people can do with paint and bristles.
His watercolours, described as miraculous, people can't believe the effects that he manages to achieve.
It was like you could touch these people. It was like the portrait could speak to you.
Behind every picture, there is a story. I'm going to peel back the layers to find out more about the lives of their creators and the worlds they came from.
There was something about this middle-class Florentine housewife that intrigued him.
Why are these the paintings we all know and love? How were they created? And what makes them the greatest paintings in the world? The Louvre, the biggest and the most famous art gallery in the world. It's a colossal museum covering an area larger than 10 football pitches, holding an extraordinary collection of around 5,000 paintings and nearly 500,000 objects. Every year it's visited by nearly 10 million people. If they all came on the same day, the queue here would stretch to Moscow. But although these buildings are stuffed with tip-top masterpieces, 8 out of 10 people queuing are here to see just one thing: the Louvre's most famous portrait, probably the world's most famous portrait, the Mona Lisa. It's an iconic work of art, once valued at $650 million, but truly, it's priceless. Well, here we are at last, just the two of us, Andrew and Mona. And that is a fantastic privilege, because most of the time, Mona Lisa is facing an endless, snaking queue of admirers shuffling forward for their 15 seconds in front of her, mobile phone in hand, before they have to leave again. What can be seen or selfied is a plainly dressed, enigmatic young woman apparently sitting in front of a mountainous view, all of it demanding close inspection. But I can't get too close, of course, because Mona Lisa is protected by an enormously tough glass box. She is better protected than any celebrity or modern president, and quite right too. She has her own temperature inside there to keep the painting as perfectly as it can be kept after all this time. Now, in a better ordered world, there are other Leonardos which I think deserve to be just as famous. There is a fabulous drawing in the National Gallery in London, for instance, of the Virgin and Child with St. Anne, which is endlessly mysterious and haunting and utterly, utterly ravishing. Then there's another portrait, Lady with an Ermine, which is brighter coloured and much more instantly grabby than this one. And yet it is her smile, her gaze, which has held the entire world mesmerised for decades. So what is it about this picture which has won hearts all over the world? Because in the end, it's just a portrait. A young woman twists her head towards us, peering out of a smoky landscape through cracks and darkened varnish. And that's about it. And yet, she is magnetic. In the flesh, she is captivating. So what's her secret? Or rather, what was Leonardo da Vinci's secret? Well, to unfold the tale of this painting and the astonishing man who created it, we must swap the centre of Western art in the 21st century for the most humming, fashionable and culturally swaggering city of the 15th, the birthplace of the biggest artistic revolution the West has ever seen, Renaissance Florence.
A visitor to Florence in 1459 said Florence is paradise on earth. It was a very prosperous city, but it was also a city with intellectual and cultural life. People enthused about how the Florentines had created a new golden age through painting, through music, through architecture. And so Florence was really a kind of crucible of a new kind of modern life or a new approach to culture.
Whether you were an artist or whether you were a scholar, whether you were interested in the sciences, it was all happening at the same time. It was like the center of the universe.
Renaissance simply means rebirth, a return to the glory days of ancient Greece and Rome. Multi-talented and brilliant minds were drawn here like bees to a flower garden. But in a city of 70,000 people, there was one person who really represents what we now mean by the term Renaissance man. Leonardo da Vinci, the man who painted the Mona Lisa, was born nearby in April 1452.
He came from a two-horse town, or maybe a one-horse town, called Vinci. It's about 20 miles from Florence. His family were small-time landowners, not incredibly rich. His father was a notary, a lawyer, making his living in Florence. He's listed in his grandfather's tax return. He's listed as a bocca, a mouth, which is rather a nice thing to call your kids their mouths, so they eat a lot of food.
From a very early age, Da Vinci was extremely intelligent, and he went to a very good school, and he showed a great love of anything visual, and he would go out sketching. And apparently he drew with his right hand and wrote with his left hand. You know, so you can imagine him with being so inspired and not wanting to waste a moment that he would be sort of going like this.
His family took note of this precocious ability.
They saw that he had a talent for drawing, and he produced a whole book of drawings, and later on his father took him to Florence to a great artist of the time, Verrocchio, and said, look at these drawings, my son did it. And apparently Verrocchio was just dumbfounded, so I've never seen drawings like this. Are you sure this is your son, and how old is he, and send him to me at once.
For the teenage Leonardo, this apprenticeship with Verrocchio was like a child footballer being coached by Pep Guardiola. A huge opportunity to learn from the formidable Verrocchio.
He's an interesting artist, a major sculptor. His studio produced paintings, and he used senior assistants often to produce the paintings. Visitors to Florence may notice that on top of the cathedral dome, built by Brunelleschi, the great architect, there's a very big bronze ball, and Verrocchio put that up there.
During the nearly 11 years that Leonardo was his student, Verrocchio worked to polish the young man's obvious artistic skills and draw out his immense natural talent. This meant working together on a huge range of commissions from the church and important Florentine families. A major artist in his own right, Verrocchio must have guessed that his student would one day surpass him. But just how soon would that be?
Verrocchio used all of the young painters very wisely in his workshop productions. And one of these paintings is the Baptism of Christ, now in the Uffizi in Florence. And he told Leonardo da Vinci to paint one of the angels in the work, an angel in the lower left-hand corner of the painting.
You look at that angel, the draperies are amazing, the hair is absolutely fantastic. It's very urgent kind of expression, and it seems almost certain that Leonardo did all the fancy oil painting finish in this picture. And the story of one of his biographers is that from that point onwards, Verrocchio said, I'll never touch a brush again.
From the very beginning, Leonardo was regarded as an unparalleled genius. At the remarkably tender age of 20, the man who would paint the Mona Lisa qualified as a master craftsman, and 6 years later he received his first solo commission to paint an altarpiece for his local chapel. In gossipy Florence, his reputation was spreading. But this wasn't down to hard graft or even innate skill. When we talk of genius, in Leonardo's case, that meant a hungry appetite for all kinds of knowledge: mathematics, poetry, engineering, hydraulics, optics, measurements of all kinds. And it was his frankly gruesome experiments in anatomy that provide one of the clues to his painting of the Mona Lisa. The Mona Lisa might be familiar, but she can bring you to your knees. The pride and joy of the world's biggest art gallery, the Louvre. This is the most recognizable painting in the world, produced by history's most influential artist. In all of art history, there has never been anybody remotely like Leonardo da Vinci. Right from the first, when he was apprenticed as a teenager into a workshop, everyone around him thought he was something special. His services were in hot demand from bishops, rival rulers, and the new rich. For the first 30 years of his career, Leonardo moved restlessly through the major cities of northern Italy, most notably Florence, Venice, and Milan, traveling wherever commissions and his curiosity took him.
He had such a short attention span that nowadays they would have said he had ADHD, which fits really because he was always looking for a new inspiration.
This was an artist who really didn't think or paint like any of his contemporaries. Every time he learned something new, he applied it immediately to his latest work.
Leonardo was restlessly experimental, and one of the things that he very quickly became interested in was oil paint, which was a new technology, and he began experimenting with it.
You could create highlights, you could create luster, you could create transparency, you could do veils, you could do atmosphere in the landscape. So he was a great pioneer of oil painting and, in fact, pushed the technique further than anyone had done to that point.
Using this newly developed skill with oil paints, Leonardo created a whole series of works. In 1482, he made Adoration of the Magi. In 1483, The Virgin on the Rocks, and in 1494 he was commissioned by the Duke of Milan to paint The Last Supper for the convent of Santa Maria delle Grazie. What makes this so revolutionary is not the paint he used, but Da Vinci's first brilliant use of perspective, making a two-dimensional image look three-dimensional. In the history of art, his use of perspective was a radical jump, a different way of thinking that would shape also how he approached the Mona Lisa.
Leonardo was extremely ambitious as a young painter, and one of the things he was very interested in was the application of geometry and mathematics to painting, specifically to create perspective. And so he worked at making his works look more realistic than any painters had done before by creating a kind of three-dimensional image on the two-dimensional plane.
Leonardo's interpretation of the evening before Christ was betrayed by one of his disciples was a monumental undertaking for an ambitious young artist. His experiments with paint mean it hasn't aged well, but his use of perspective made him famous.
The status as an artist in the Renaissance period changed very sharply. Artists acquired pretensions, they acquired a theory of perspective and proportions, and they then claimed to be a liberal art, that is to say, one of the higher intellectual arts.
And this raises the profile of artists and gives them a kind of prominence that they did not have in previous decades or centuries. And what we have then happening is artists become like rock stars.
This was a time that propelled the artist to great stature and celebrity status. If we would have had I'm a Celebrity, they would have been there. It's a time when artists were seen as sort of like mini gods. You know, they had a God-given talent.
Leonardo was a household name elsewhere in Italy, but he'd been away from Florence for 30 years. So when he returned to his hometown in 1500, he needed to establish a reputation here. But first, Leonardo needed somewhere to base himself. Maria Wellington Gattan is a doctor of Renaissance studies.
We're here at the Santissima Annunziata Square with the church sanctuary of Santissima Annunziata behind us. This is thought to be the place where Leonardo first was housed when he came to Florence in 1500. Leonardo's father was a notary for the friars. One could easily imagine that with his connections that he helped Leonardo arrange this housing, because of course Leonardo hadn't been in Florence for the past couple of decades. When Leonardo came to Florence, he came without commissions. So he was looking for work. He certainly would have been interested in painting portraits of the Florentine upper and middle classes.
With a host of potential clients, Leonardo would begin work on the portrait that would define his entire career. But the mystery for many centuries was who exactly it was that he'd painted.
The commission for the Mona Lisa has various stories, and each of them are fascinating.
I suppose the most fashionable in the last 20 years of the daft ideas is that this is Leonardo's pupil, Salai, this rascally but rather handsome pupil with curly hair. That it's a portrait of Salai in drag.
Some people said she was his mother. Some people said she was the Virgin Mary or the Duchess of Milan.
Some people say it's a self-portrait of him whilst he's dealing with his homosexual tendencies, and at that time being a homosexual was against the law.
It seems that this extraordinary picture must have an extraordinary explanation, but in fact this extraordinary picture has a sober explanation.
And the sober answer to the mystery is found in where Leonardo was living and in his father's business relationships.
Also connected with the Santissima Annunziata is Francesco del Giocondo. He was a silk merchant in Florence, and we know that he and Leonardo's father knew each other and that they had had business dealings with each other. And so one could very easily imagine Leonardo's father suggesting perhaps that Francesco commissioned a portrait of his wife, Lisa, from Leonardo.
That this was the case was proved beyond doubt in 2005, when a German librarian found a note written by one of Leonardo's contemporaries, wondering if he would leave the portrait of Francesco del Giocondo's wife, Lisa Gherardini, unfinished. So what do we know about her? She was only 24. She was the wife of a fairly wealthy trader in silks and fabrics, and possibly also in slaves, who was himself a client of Leonardo's father, a notary or lawyer. So they knew the family. It's said that Leonardo used acrobats and musicians and clowns to keep Mona smiling, because it's difficult when you're painting somebody to avoid their face becoming rather frozen with concentration. But if you look closely at her smile, I don't think it's an amused smile particularly. I think it's a sardonic, knowing smile. This is somebody who is staring at us just as hard as we are all staring at her. Perhaps she'd guessed just how long it would take Leonardo to finish his painting of her. After starting in 1503, he never stopped working on this modestly sized rectangle. His magpie mind was far too restless.
He was what I would call a helicopter painter. He hovered endlessly over works of art. He said, art is never finished, only abandoned. You really had to prize a work of art out of his hands.
He was always on the go, always looking for different things. Shall I invent this? Shall I paint that? And that would have been part of his restlessness and also part of his inquiring mind and also his needing and his desire to think outside of the box.
Leonardo's thirst for knowledge was never just confined to painting. He made himself expert in chemistry, botany, mathematics, engineering, music, astronomy, and map-making. But it was another of his obsessions, knowing how things worked, that's the key to the enigma of the Mona Lisa.
Leonardo was one of history's greatest anatomical illustrators, and probably the best, in fact. That was how you would make your reputation in art, by creating very realistic-looking figures that had tremendous anatomical accuracy. And so Leonardo embraced that innovation in painting, and like so many things that he did, took it to the next level. And in fact, he said that anatomy is for a painter what grammar is for a writer. This is the structure on which you build.
The study of anatomy is as old as medicine itself. It was revered in ancient Greece. But in Leonardo's Italy, it seemed new and vaguely sinister. Artists were just starting to see the value of knowing how the human body works by observing the dissection of corpses. Leonardo inevitably went further. He wanted to cut the bodies up with his own hands. In this hospital, the Santa Maria Nuova, even while painting the Mona Lisa, he was likely to be found alongside the working doctors. Maria Antonia Rinaldi is a lecturer in art history.
Leonardo wrote generically that here in the hospital he did 30 dissections. He wrote about the dissection of an old man. Actually, the old man told to Leonardo that he was more than 100 years old, and Leonardo said he passed away in such a serene way that I wanted to understand the reason of such a dolce morte, sweet death. But Leonardo was also interested in trying to understand how the man functioned. The man as a machine, to understand the movement, but then also to understand really how the human being functioned.
Leonardo thought that only by knowing exactly what was under Lisa's skin could he begin to capture her essence in paint.
He wanted to see how the muscles were connected to the sinews, to the cartilage, to the bones.
He would not see the dissection as influencing art or art as influencing dissection. He saw them as the same thing in a way. It's a much deeper aspiration for understanding the body than most artists.
This wasn't CSI Florence taking place in a spotlessly hygienic pathologist's lab. To create the Mona Lisa, Leonardo needed to withstand an assault on all the senses.
Leonardo talked about the difficulties in dissecting the body, and he talked about how fast the body decomposed.
There are no preservatives, and this is really gory. You start with the intestines and the abdomen because it decays very quickly. You go to the chest and the brain decays pretty quickly, and the muscles you can leave for a bit later, and the skeleton even later than that. So, yeah, Leonardo writes passionately saying, you know, you've got to have great patience and so on, but you've also got to put up with the sheer unpleasantness of it.
It was a gooey unpleasantness that Leonardo was happy to endure in pursuit of understanding and perfecting his portrait.
He talks about how awful it is to spend the night with these dead men who've been flayed of their skins. And so there are these horrible specters peering out at Leonardo, we have to imagine. But clearly, he was committed to this kind of anatomical study.
He saw painting as remaking nature. So to remake nature, you had to understand nature, not just what something looks like on the surface, but you had to understand what was going on inside.
His curiosity, his appetite of understanding, learning, with such an attention to the detail that his anatomical studies are quite perfect.
Leonardo made reams of notes and drawings about his discoveries, obsessed by the inner workings of the human body. That smile, where exactly were the muscles that moved the mouth and the lips? And how did they combine? For Leonardo, his scientific experiments and his artistic endeavors were inseparable. He was the great connector. There was no reason to keep science and art separate in this life. And so, instead, Leonardo combined the two disciplines. He applied everything he was learning about human anatomy to his art. In this case, the face of the Mona Lisa. The Mona Lisa is the most iconic and most recognizable portrait in the world, the work of an artist of undisputed genius, Leonardo da Vinci. Leonardo was much more than an artist. His insatiable appetite for knowledge of all available kinds spread far beyond the canvas. He was fascinated by things as diverse as mathematics, optics, anatomy, and in particular, human dissection. And quite rightly, he could never separate the science from the art, so that everything he learned in the morgue turned up eventually on the canvas. There aren't many paintings that more or less everyone in the Western world can describe, and analysing it is a joy because Leonardo's extraordinary talent shines through. But once you know that his love of dissection helped to create that famous face, it's hard to see it in quite the same way again. One of the great things about Leonardo is that his drawings and his notebooks show us his mind actually working. And so when we say, oh, he learned from optics in the painting, what exactly do we mean? Well, take the very famous case of the way that Mona Lisa's eyes appear to follow you around the room. That is because the pupil in one eye is looking directly at the viewer, and the pupil in the other eye is slightly off kilter, and that gives the illusion. It became very, very famous. So famous, it's known as the Mona Lisa effect, but it's pure optics. Really close attention to detail produces mystery. Take the case of Mona Lisa's famous smile. Now, if you look directly at her, she doesn't seem to be smiling at all. But if you glance to one side, she does seem to be smiling. And that is because of sfumato, this famous smoky technique that Leonardo uses right at the corner of her lips. After cutting up eyes and studying optical theory, Leonardo recognized that vision is only sharp when we look at things straight on. The eyes can be fooled. By painting extraordinarily fine downward lines at the corners of her lips, he creates the effect. She isn't smiling. Let your gaze widen and the lips blur. The corners appear to lift, her lips change shape. She is smiling. It's almost invisible, and yet it produces the illusion of a mobile, smiling mouth.
There's no hard outlines in the Mona Lisa's face. They're all blurred, so it gives the sense that she's moving. And also, she's not painted directly onto you. She's at an angle. And because she's at an angle, she's showing that she's moving and also showing that she's occupying a three-dimensional space.
I think he was rather pleased when people picked up what he was doing. This very daring recipe of the slightly sideways pose, the direct look. In most cases with female portraits, it was not polite for a woman to engage in eye contact with a man. So you had downcast eyes, you were in profile if you did a portrait. Leonardo breaks that convention.
Leonardo's painting was the closest thing to naturalism that portraiture had yet seen. This was a picture soaked in understanding. Every part of this canvas, from the corkscrew shine of her hair to the details on Mona Lisa's robe, all of those things were achieved by a minute attention to detail. This is, of course, a still image, but she is alive. After spending more than 4 years toiling on this masterpiece, constantly reworking it, changing and tweaking wherever he saw fit, technically, Leonardo was finished, but he would not let it go.
It was very typical of Da Vinci not to finish a work of art. He never felt that he'd made it good enough. He always felt there was more to do, just change this bit and that bit. A lot of artists have this problem, especially if you're a perfectionist, as he was. The family who commissioned the Mona Lisa never got the painting, but they never paid the money either.
As Leonardo kept it with him, few people ever had the chance to see the Mona Lisa, certainly until it went on display in the 19th century. But a small number of Leonardo's contemporaries did get to see her up close and personal, and the impact on them was seismic.
Immediately, the Mona Lisa influenced the way that artists were working at the time.
The artist who probably had the most profound reaction to Leonardo was young Raphael. Raphael painted these two aristocrats, Angelo and Maddalena Doni, and she is absolutely in the pose of Mona Lisa, but doesn't smile.
He clearly had seen the Mona Lisa and could not have painted Maddalena without having seen this work of art. And likewise, his Lady with the Unicorn is almost a complete copy of the Mona Lisa. And so this becomes transformative in portraiture as painters now begin doing their versions of the Mona Lisa.
It It may have changed the history of portraiture, but Leonardo was failing to leave his masterpiece alone. Over the next decade, he continued to tweak and finesse it.
An indication of the importance of the Mona Lisa to Leonardo is the fact that he kept it with him throughout the rest of his life. It was something that he really believed was one of the finest expressions of his brush, and he could not let it go. It was something he still wanted to perfect.
Consequently, the image we know and see today is quite different to the original portrait and may indeed be unrecognizable as Lisa del Giocondo.
It's clear from the technical analysis we can now see a lot of the underdrawing. She started off with an orthodox Tuscan dress, and it gradually matured into something which was very decorative with the twisted shawl and so on. And she's put in front of this very remarkable landscape. So it's clear that the portrait becomes what I call a universal picture. Leonardo is pouring knowledge into it about light, about anatomy, about psychology, about geology. Now, nobody much was interested in Lisa del Giocondo outside the family. So it ceases to become a mugshot and becomes something much more universal.
In 1517, with the Mona Lisa nearly always at hand, the 65-year-old Leonardo became an eminent figure in the King of France's court.
He went to work for Francis I. Now, for Francis was trying to buy into the Italian Renaissance. It was the latest thing, and he got the top striker, as it were. Leonardo was expected to do things, but he was a kind of ornament of the court. He had a huge salary, big salary, much bigger than even most courtiers and most civil servants would have had.
But Leonardo would only serve the king for 2 short years. He died in Amboise, in the Loire Valley, in 1519. It's said that he passed away in the arms of the king himself, who was devastated by his death.
Leonardo da Vinci was one of the greatest painters in Europe at this point, and so his death was widely mourned.
And we can say, yes, he finished not many paintings, but he finished the world's most famous painting, the world's second most famous painting, the Last Supper, and the world's most famous drawing, the man in the square and the circle, based upon the writings of the Roman architect Vitruvius. And when people say to me he didn't finish much, I said, well, he finished these 3 most famous things, and that's not bad.
When Leonardo died, the Mona Lisa was bought by the French royal family, and for the next 278 years was moved around among their numerous palaces. It was only ever seen by France's rulers and their most valued courtiers. Finally, in 1797, Leonardo's painting made its way here to the Louvre, where it was displayed with the rest of the former royal collection. And for 114 years, that's where it stayed. To most of its visitors, it was just one more portrait hanging in a crowded gallery. Its place in the world's cultural landscape was frankly about as big as the space it took up on the wall of the Louvre. That is, until the 21st of August 1911, when the painting simply disappeared. Nowadays, people all over the world can identify the Mona Lisa at a glance. It is unquestionably the most famous portrait ever created, endlessly reproduced, and hugely influential all over the globe. But the Mona Lisa's worldwide fame only really began in the 20th century, in 1911, when she made headlines around the globe after she disappeared overnight, upped and offed from her home here in the Louvre. It's a hard-to-believe tale, and it begins on the evening of the 21st of August. With no security measures but locked doors, the Louvre's 400 rooms were guarded by just a handful of men, and none of them saw Leonardo's masterpiece vanish into thin air.
No one noticed for 28 hours that the Mona Lisa was not on the wall.
Paintings were often being removed to be photographed, so that's what staff assumed was happening to the Mona Lisa.
When they discovered it was missing, of course it became enormous news.
Journalists couldn't get enough of the story. Karine Friedberger, a specialist in the history of art, is at the French National Library.
This newspaper is called Le Petit Parisien, and the title says this famous painting by Leonardo da Vinci, La Joconde, Mona Lisa, has disappeared from the Louvre Museum. How? Since when? We don't know. We only have the frame left. And then it takes us through the shock of the personnel in the Louvre Museum, finding this empty space and wondering who could have had access.
Now, for the first time, anyone who bought a newspaper knew about the Mona Lisa. The Louvre was closed for 9 days, and when it reopened, something rather extraordinary happened.
The public reaction was just astonishing. People would queue for hours and hours to go into the Louvre, but they couldn't see the Mona Lisa because it had been stolen, but they just wanted to see the wall space where the Mona Lisa was once hanging.
More people came to see the missing Mona Lisa than actually had been coming to see the Mona Lisa herself in the years before that.
They left offerings by it and notes. People wept when they saw that it wasn't there. It became a bit hysterical.
No one was arrested and charged, and there were no clues to follow. The Paris police force's reputation plummeted. But, by contrast, her disappearance turbocharged the Mona Lisa's fame.
One of the things that happened in the aftermath of the theft is that the Paris police put the Mona Lisa's image, thousands of them, on every street corner in the city. And it gave an incredibly wide exposure to the painting.
This very quickly became a worldwide story. And it so happens that the postcard sellers outside the Louvre made quite a lot of money selling those postcards to visitors who were coming to see the Mona Lisa in the Louvre, and since it wasn't there, they were actually buying the postcards.
And while no end of reproductions were being made, the enigmatic original remained lost. 2 years passed, and hope for her return was fading. Then, out of the blue, in 1913, a letter found its way to the Uffizi Gallery in Florence, signed Leonardo, and offering to sell the Mona Lisa. The Uffizi's director agreed to meet Leonardo, and in a sting operation, the police swooped and arrested him. The seller's real name was Vincenzo Peruggia.
Peruggia, an Italian worker who was working at the time in the Louvre, hated the fact that the French had one of Italy's greatest paintings, and it was his prime desire to return it back to Italy. So he went in one night after work, dressed as a workman, and while nobody was about, he took it off the wall and he took it home.
His argument was that he was an Italian patriot and he was returning this painting to the land of its birth because of the fact that he said Napoleon had stolen it from the Italians, which of course did not happen. It traveled to France in the baggage of Leonardo da Vinci himself.
Peruggia pleaded guilty to theft, and he served 8 months in prison. With the thief imprisoned and the now world-famous Mona Lisa on her way home, all of Paris was jubilant.
Once it was found and it was brought back, there was like a huge city party, huge carnival.
It's been said that in bars across Paris, can-can girls performed, dressed as the Mona Lisa.
People dusted their faces with yellow paint, people shaved their eyebrows and made their hairline bigger to look like the Mona Lisa.
Back in the Louvre, the Mona Lisa's place in the history of art had been secured forever.
And she became a celebrity. Even so much so that even now the Mona Lisa has her own postbox, allegedly. She gets mail.
And that new global fame made the Mona Lisa into the Marilyn of the early 20th century. A new cultural icon had been born. Everyone wanted to see the small, famous painting in the flesh, and her travels on loan abroad were treated like a royal tour, prompting a semi-hysteria wherever she went.
Now, as befits a lady more renowned than any queen, Mona Lisa leaves the Louvre under heavy guard for a trip to the United States.
Whenever the French government needed a little hand with some foreign relations, the Mona Lisa could be lent out to help oil the wheels.
No VIP has been surrounded by more security. The Secret Service has been ordered to stand guard over the lady with the enigmatic smile 24 hours a day.
While she was on display in New York, nearly 2 million people queued to get a 20-second or so glimpse of her. Similar numbers flocked to see her wherever she went in the world before officially retiring, exhausted, to the Louvre in 1974, where she's remained its biggest attraction ever since.
Mona Lisa is the best-known image in the world. There really is no rival. I've seen her twice out of the frame, and it has a kind of living presence. It has a sort of breathing presence. This sounds very pretentious, but there's no other way to describe it.
It's quite incredible that she remains up there, bigger than any other work of art. Nothing has usurped her. She's remained the greatest celebrity portrait that we know.
That's the extraordinary draw of the Mona Lisa. She's a global phenomenon, seems to smile at everyone, wherever they are, all over the world.
The Mona Lisa just does not belong to the Louvre and the French state or to Leonardo da Vinci. The Mona Lisa belongs to the world. This is part of the cultural heritage of all of us because it's such a wonderful work of art.
The story of the Mona Lisa and Leonardo da Vinci, the genius who painted her, has blockbuster bestseller dimensions. The autopsy, the optics, the explosion of new thinking in Renaissance Italy, a gay artist's decade-long obsession with a 24-year-old girl, her journey across the Alps to France, the theft, the return, the global fame. It is all a great story, but frankly, it means nothing compared to this, the fact that the hairs on the back of your neck stand up in her presence, that gaze, that smile. Fundamentally, this is not a portrait of a particular person. This is a picture of humanity by one of art's great geniuses, clothed in beauty and brimming with inner mystery. It may be dark, it may be old, it may be quite small, and it may be over-familiar, but it is without doubt one of the world's great paintings. Next time on the world's greatest paintings, a canvas so blindingly famous it sets the National Gallery ablaze. This is one of the brightest pictures you will ever see. This is a story of heroic optimism.
Nobody had ever done anything quite that wild.
Loneliness.
His family, I think, started to realise the madness had begun.
And heartbreak.
He thought it was going to be a whole new beginning for him. And, of course, it wasn't to be.
Behind Vincent van Gogh's Sunflowers. These are the stories of 10 of the greatest paintings in the world. I'm Andrew Marr. Art, not politics, is the great passion of my life. For me, it gets to the heart of what it is to be human. In galleries across the globe, there are great paintings, works made with almost supernatural skill, fierce passion, and extraordinary brainpower. Now I want to tell stories behind some of the most iconic images in history, pictures like Leonardo's Mona Lisa, Van Gogh's Sunflowers, and Turner's Fighting Temeraire, paintings that represent the pinnacle of what people can do with paint and bristles.
His watercolours, described as miraculous, people can't believe the effects that he manages to achieve.
It was like you could touch these people. It was like the portrait could speak to you.
Behind every picture, there is a story. I'm going to peel back the layers to find out more about the lives of their creators and the worlds they came from.
There was something about this middle-class Florentine housewife that intrigued him.
Why are these the paintings we all know and love? How were they created? And what makes them the greatest paintings in the world? I'm in London's National Gallery, just after the doors have closed for the evening, which is lucky for me, because if they were open, I could not be standing here, because of the 5 million people who come through these rooms every year. So many are attracted to just one image, like bears to honey or bees to nectar. What is the image, you ask yourself, but already you know the answer. This is The Sunflowers by Vincent van Gogh, the patron saint of loneliness. It's a deceptively simple image, just 15 sunflowers in a modest pot. And yet, this picture is a phenomenon. It quite literally dazzles anyone who comes into its orbit. This is one of the brightest pictures you will ever see. You walk into this room, which is full of fantastic paintings by very famous painters, and this punches you hard in the eye, so hard you can almost fall over. But here is the paradox. Behind the brightness, it is also a surprisingly dark picture. For an artist who produced almost 2,000 drawings and paintings, it's often said that this picture is the one that Van Gogh was most proud of. It's a deeply personal painting that captures a definitive moment in his life. Van Gogh did not paint this to hang in the National Gallery or any other gallery, frankly. He painted it for a much more personal and intimate reason. He painted it to hang in the bedroom of a friend for whose company he was desperate and who he had invited down to his house to stay. It was, if you like, a kind of lure. And although it may appear to be a joyous picture, the story behind it is frankly harrowing. It's a story which begins with the artist as a boy, in a life tarnished by tragedy right from the start. A year to the day before Van Gogh was born in 1853, his parents had another son who died a few hours after birth, also called Vincent.
From an early age, he was quite intense. In the churchyard outside the room where he was born and where he first grew up, there was a tombstone with his own name and date of birth 1 year earlier, so it must have affected him.
Brought up in Brabant, southern Holland, Van Gogh was the eldest of 6, but he was also always a loner.
Van Gogh, I think, was a really interesting, extraordinary, possibly quite frustrating young man. He was baffling. And he was somebody who would become instantly enamoured of something and possibly just as quickly give it up again.
He was a missionary.
A bookshop assistant.
He was a preacher.
He wanted to be a priest at one point.
His family actually offered to pay for him to go to theological college. He's like, oh, I don't want to go anymore.
An apprentice art dealer.
Some say he was a baker.
He's also a bookseller.
This is my favourite, an unpaid assistant prep school master in Ramsgate. His family showed signs of absolute desperation in trying to think of what Vincent could do.
But there was one member of his family who saw talent in Van Gogh from the start. His younger brother and closest friend, Theo.
Theo suggested to him, why don't you try your hand at being an artist, because, you know, you're quite good.
He never had any formal art training. He taught himself, and he enjoyed it.
It was a career he was able to pursue only because Theo, by then an art dealer in Paris, offered to support him.
Van Gogh's relationship with his brother is complicated, like all his relationships, but nevertheless it's the most enduring relationship. Theo is his anchor, and without Theo's support, financial, moral, emotional, Van Gogh may never have developed as an artist.
His early paintings are a world away from the sunflowers. He painted what he saw around him, miners and struggling peasants, the subject of an ambitious early work which is almost a caricature of the Dutch tradition of peasant portraits, the potato eaters.
It's a work which is about peasant family gathered around this rather meagre meal, and it's a symphony of browns and beiges, no bright colour at all.
It also shows his identifying with the people who he's painting. It seems to contain anguish within it. You see these people who are pinched by poverty. There's really not enough to eat, and Van Gogh gets this across in his work in a quite extraordinarily empathetic way.
He painted the peasants with haggard features and desperate expressions. He was quietly pleased with the finished canvas. Perhaps this would be the piece to launch him as an artist. But it didn't sell. Not only was it bleak, his critics complained, but the figures were badly realized. It was at this point that Van Gogh made a crucial decision. He would leave the Low Countries. He decided to go to France, or rather, to its beating cultural heart, Paris. Good call. Paris would help him unlock a new creative style, a fresh vision. What Vincent would find in Paris would change his entire approach to painting. Vincent van Gogh's Sunflowers is one of the most famous paintings in the world. Created in 1888, it still dazzles us more than 130 years later. This is such a familiar image, it's quite hard to remember just how strange and radical this painting is. First thing to say, every painter is told you need lots of contrasts of colour, different colours rubbing up against each other. And what has Van Gogh done? It's basically all yellow. Primrose yellow, orangey yellow, a kind of creamy yellow, a greeny yellow. Yellow, 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 and yellow. He has more or less used up all his yellow on this one image. The reasoning behind this reckless use of colour originated in the next chapter of Van Gogh's life. Paris.
If you were interested in painting, that was the place you had to go. There was an awful lot of exciting avant-garde ferment and controversial cutting-edge stuff being done in Paris.
Paris at the time was so different to what he was used to. There was colour, there were bars, there were brothels. He fell in love with the museums, with the art, with the fact that all the artists were there as one big family, and he wanted to be part of that family.
He soon became friends with radical artists like Toulouse-Lautrec. They were as inspired as he was by the Impressionists.
The great revelation of Paris for Van Gogh was colour.
When he saw the Impressionists, he was so flabbergasted by the colours they were using and their small, light brush marks.
Impressionism and its fizz of colour was so exciting to him.
The Impressionist techniques changed everything. This was how Van Gogh was meant to paint. All he needed now was a subject that spoke to and of him. Common, prickly, standing alone. And it was when he stumbled on an allotment during one of his frequent walks that he finally found it. The image that would come to define him. Here, Van Gogh made a painting of one lonely sunflower. Now, nothing against sunflowers, but they're not exactly the most sophisticated beautiful, interesting flowers. They're not beautiful roses. They're not like those gorgeous, multicoloured tulips the Dutch enjoyed painting so much. They're not even hollyhocks. They are fairly basic flowers. They're tough, but really quite earthy blooms, and something about their character clearly spoke to Van Gogh.
He is, in a sense, an outsider in the art world. He's a maverick. He doesn't fit in well. And the sunflower has that kind of rebellious quality that I think he identifies with.
For whatever reason, his paintings were transformed. The dark, dull tones of his first canvases disappeared for good. Instead, he embraced his palette, reaching for brighter shades, adding emphatic dashes of yellow. He worked more urgently, using stronger, swifter strokes. Even the dying, cut sunflowers feel full of vigour. Eventually, they caught the eye of a man who was to play a huge role in his life from this moment on, the one who would inspire his most famous work. His name was Paul Gogh, an older and more established artist who'd seen some of Van Gogh's work hanging on a local cafe wall. He asked for 2 of the sunflower paintings.
And in return, Paul Gauguin gave Vincent one of his paintings. So there's an early kind of mark of friendship in this exchange of paintings.
His friends may have admired his work, but Van Gogh was struggling to find a wider audience. His paintings just weren't selling.
You know, he's living a very precarious life. It's very isolated. He has no real profile in the art world of Paris.
Worse still, he wasn't getting on with his brother Theo.
From the evidence we have, it seems that virtually nobody could stand living with Vincent van Gogh or indeed spending extended periods in his company. You just couldn't stop him talking.
He was incredibly intense. They were living in a very small flat, which was quite claustrophobic for the 2 of them. Theo was going to his job every day and Vincent was staying at home painting, making an awful lot of mess.
Theo reports that after a hard day at work as an art dealer, he'd come home, have supper, and Vincent would start talking to him. Theo would say he was tired and thought he'd go to bed. Would go to bed, and Vincent would follow him into the bedroom, pull up a chair and carry on talking to him. He was very difficult company.
Just 2 years after he'd arrived in Paris, Van Gogh was now desperate to leave.
He was suffering, as he often did, from depression, low spirits, heavy drinking. He didn't like the cold and dark of the Parisian winter. He wanted to experience the bright light and colour of the South. And all these motivations prompted him, possibly quite on the spur of the moment, to climb on the express train to Provence.
Vincent van Gogh arrived in Arles, in the southeast of France, towards the end of February 1888. For local expert Philippe Gonninet, there was an immediate connection between the artist and this quiet, ancient town.
Van Gogh came to the south of France, looking for the color, for the light. Actually, he took the train to Marseille and just stopped in Arles for a short period of time, really fell in love with the city, hence the reason why he stayed.
He suddenly felt this desire to paint, and not just 1 or 2 pictures, but to keep painting. He wanted to paint the sunshine.
The next 15 months were astonishingly productive. Van Gogh's style began to transform once again, developing the bold expressiveness that would play such an important part in the sunflowers. He filled his canvases with blossoming trees and local workers. Fishing boats he saw on a day trip to the coast. Many of the scenes he painted look just the same today.
So I'm now standing in front of Terrasse de Café la Nuit, one of the central bars in Arles that was painted by Van Gogh. And he would love to come in the evening. He had his wooden hat with little candles stuck on it in order to have a little light in order to do the painting and see the painting he was doing. He's one of the first painters to paint outside in the evening.
But this wasn't the only reason he stood out in Arles.
The local used to call him le fourou, the mad ginger guy, and they didn't really like him because A, he was an artist, B, he was drinking a lot of absinthe at the time, he was sleeping with prostitutes, plus people that had seen him painting were a bit worried about him because he was painting like frantic, manic, and very, very quick and talking to himself.
People found him strange, and a lot of Van Gogh's life was spent being incredibly lonely. He was a person that people didn't really understand. If they did understand him, they often didn't like him or were scared of him. And this led to a great feeling of isolation.
So now I'm taking you to the Rue du Bout du Monde, the end of the world street. That was the former name where the brothel Van Gogh used to go is located. One of those tiny houses where we'd be coming to look for comfort and someone to talk to.
Just 3 months after he arrived in Arles, Van Gogh confessed to Theo in a letter, "You know, I've always thought it ridiculous for painters to live alone. You always lose when you're isolated." And he knew he had to do something to make his life happier.
He conceived the idea that it would be very good to get other friends and associates from Paris to come and settle there, to set up an artist's colony.
It would be a wonderful community of artists where they'd all live happily and they'd sell their work together. Be a collective.
Van Gogh looked around for a suitable location, and in the scruffier part of town between the railway station and the brothels, he found it, the Yellow House.
He was really happy and wrote very enthusiastically to 2 of his sisters and his brother about how he was going to start this arts community. And he was looking forward to the future.
The first person he invited was Paul Gauguin, the artist he'd met in Paris, to whom he'd given his 2 early sunflower paintings.
Gauguin didn't want to go. Gauguin came from a very different background. Before he was a painter, he was a stockbroker. He was used to living a very different type of life. But what encouraged him was Van Gogh's brother, Theo, who at the time sold Gauguin's paintings. And he said to Gauguin, "I will pay you to go and stay with my brother."
So that July, Gauguin finally agreed to come to Arles. Full of anticipation, Van Gogh wanted to make a dramatic gesture. He decided to decorate Gauguin's bedroom, and he turned to the one subject that had brought them together in the first place: sunflowers. Van Gogh had dreamed of a set of 12 sunflower pictures. This is one of 4 that he made in an extraordinary, intense burst of energy over just a few days. Each canvas is slightly different. The first is a simple composition. 3 huge blooms pop against a bright, bold background. Then he experiments with much more vivid shades. The sunflowers are rougher and more abstract, his loose strokes accentuating their spiky petals. By the third painting, the composition had a calmer confidence. 14 sunflowers in every stage of life, complemented by gentler, more even tones. He thought it would be his best, until he started on the 4th.
He's depicting 15 sunflowers with a very radical yellow on yellow colour scheme that he describes as light on light.
Nobody had ever done anything quite that wild. Essentially, all yellow, yellow on yellow, different kinds of yellow. A monochrome picture.
Some of them just have the spikes left, so they're sort of at the end of their day, passing away.
There's not this kind of dishonesty of showing flowers in a sort of permanent state of bloom and of youthfulness. And that, again, is very characteristic of Van Gogh. He's looking at the natural world with this very kind of receptive eye. He's looking at all the detail, but also this kind of passage of time.
When Van Gogh was painting sunflowers, he was at his happiest. And he was happy because he thought his life was going to change now. Gauguin was coming. All his past demons would disappear through Gauguin. They would paint together, they would live together. This was Van Gogh, who was used to solitude. He thought it was going to be a whole new beginning for him. And of course, it wasn't to be.
Van Gogh poured all of himself into these paintings. Like all his great paintings, I believe that these are fundamentally lively, passionate, colourful pictures about human loneliness. In the midst of movement and colour and life and beauty, we are, in the end, by ourselves. These are the final testament of a lonely man, which is perhaps why we respond to them so strongly. Only 4 months after he finished them, he had a full mental breakdown, and 2 years later, he was dead. In the summer of 1888, Van Gogh painted a series of sunflowers, culminating in these 15 magnificent blooms. Even now, more than 100 years on, his flowers seem as vivid as the day he painted them. So what techniques did Van Gogh use on his canvas to capture the spirit of the subject he loved so much? Classically in painting, you're taught to make the brushwork vanish. You can't see it. It's so smooth that you have the illusion that you're looking at a real flower or a real pot or whatever it might be. Here, Van Gogh has done exactly the opposite. You can see every single flicker and mark that his thumb and forefinger and the brush have made. He uses impasto, great big gobs of paint slammed onto the canvas. You can see he's taken a brush and filled it up with really thick paint and then kind of stabbed it into the canvas, and then he's pulled the brush straight out again. So it's almost three-dimensional. The strokes of the petals and the leaves are, again, great wadges of paint. It's not a picture of a dead sunflower. It's pretty close to being the thing itself. And the sunflowers aren't the only place where you can see Van Gogh's ingenuity on this canvas. If you look at the back of the painting, the wall, it's a kind of buttery slab of paint. You can actually see not just the thickness of the brushes he was using, you can actually see the individual bristles of the brush still captured in reverse on the oil paint. He's saying, remember that I, Van Gogh, made this with my hands. Think about my thick fingers, think about my brushes, think about the oil and the goo and the slap and the sweat that went into this. All of that is still bleeding and dripping off the canvas all these years afterwards. For the very first time as he painted his sunflowers, Van Gogh was full of hope for his community at the Yellow House, for his friendship with Paul Gauguin, and for his own future as an artist. All of this he funneled directly into the radiant blooms. It took Van Gogh just a week to complete the 4 sunflower paintings, and when he had, he put the last 2, the 2 that he liked best, onto the walls of Gauguin's bedroom. And they must have blazed from the walls of the bedroom of this tiny French townhouse. A shout, a scream almost, for companionship.
The effect of Gauguin's bedroom must have been quite extraordinarily overwhelming. He must have got quite a shock when he arrived.
He was bowled over. He loved them. Of all the things that Van Gogh did, Gauguin loved the sunflowers the most.
Quickly, the 2 men settled into an intense partnership.
To start off with, they set out working together, and it actually goes surprisingly well. Van Gogh settles down. They start producing quite a lot of good work.
Van Gogh was very quick, very immediate, painting a picture a day, attacking the canvas almost as if he's dancing with it. Gauguin, on the other hand, was much more methodical, much slower, much more considered. Van Gogh liked to paint from life. Gauguin liked to paint from his imagination and from his memory.
In November 1888, Van Gogh painted portraits of the two men's chairs, wittily capturing their different natures.
The two chairs are a symbol of his and Gauguin's friendship, and they seem, just through these simple chairs, to encapsulate the two very different personalities of the artist.
Vincent's chair shows his simplicity. He didn't need much to be happy in life, whereas Gauguin was a bit more worldly. Gauguin would be reading modern novels and keeping up to date with what was fashionable.
When you look at them, you feel as if they've perhaps only just been vacated. They're a wonderful symbol of this community that Van Gogh had so wanted to build.
But as days turned to weeks, this dream became less and less a reality, and with only each other for company, the two men's differences became more and more pronounced.
Gauguin found living with Van Gogh very, very difficult. The two artists were very, very different people.
Gauguin hated living in Arles. He said it was the filthiest hole in the south. He really disliked it. And they were beginning to get on each other's nerves.
Then the weather deteriorates. Wind starts blowing, it starts getting cold and rainy. They have to work indoors, which means they're working in one small room. Van Gogh is probably talking quite a lot of the time, and pacing up and down is another of his habits when working. Gauguin is trying to concentrate, and after a while, things get more and more tense.
They would argue about art. They would argue about cooking, the best way to cook tomatoes, even. They argued about everything. Van Gogh scared Gauguin. It's been said that Gauguin recalled how he would be asleep in his bed and he'd wake up and Van Gogh would be standing over him, staring at him while he was in bed asleep.
It didn't take long for everything to come to a head.
Something on December the 23rd pushed him over the edge. What Gauguin said afterwards is he was just so bizarre I couldn't stand it anymore.
Gauguin said, that's it, I've had enough, I'm leaving, I'm going back to Paris and I'm going, I won't be coming back.
Van Gogh has such a volatile temper. It just escalated, it went crazy. Gauguin ran out into the street and Van Gogh followed him with his razor.
The two men continued to scream at each other until Gauguin took refuge in a hotel. Van Gogh stormed back to the Yellow House and, still holding his razor, sliced off a chunk of an ear.
He wrapped up his ear in newspaper, put a beret on to disguise his wound, and took it off to the brothel, where he left a door for a certain employee who went under the name of Rachel, went back to his house, got into bed and passed out.
Really, it was self-harm. He was desperate. All his hopes and his dreams and his future with Gauguin had disappeared. They'd evaporated over this row, and he felt as though he had no future.
By the time the police arrived the next morning, it said the walls of the Yellow House were stained with blood. Van Gogh was rushed to hospital, the doctors questioning if he would survive.
And it was really then that his family, I think, started to realise that he genuinely was, as his brother put it, mad.
He was obviously getting hallucinations. He was behaving very strangely. There were complaints from the neighbours about odd behaviour. From that point on, he actually seems to have lost confidence himself. And finally, he tells his brother that he doesn't think at this stage he's really up to living on his own.
5 months after he severed his ear, Van Gogh was committed to this asylum in Saint-Rémy-de-Provence. It's an old monastery which still serves as a psychiatric hospital today.
Van Gogh came by himself and signed the registry by himself, asking him to be at the hospital, looking for a refuge, really. He knew he needed some help and he needed some peace for a while.
Nowadays, he would be classed as being bipolar, but then they would lock you up. He'd be surrounded by people in straitjackets, people wailing, people crying. It was very traumatic. Behind locked doors, bars in front of windows, cold rooms. It was a very difficult time for him.
In his letters, he wrote of being kept awake by terrible howls, as of animals in a menagerie, and he described the other men as my companions in misfortune.
The main treatment was cold baths. For Van Gogh, I think it was twice a week, a 2-hour bath. The treatment were basically useless. Proof is that most of the patients that were staying while Van Gogh was here spent all their life and died at the hospital.
But for Van Gogh, there was only one therapy that was ever really going to help.
He painted a lot. He did 150 paintings that are known of. The landscapes, the color, the sky was something that would give him peace every day.
Interestingly and very sadly, some of his best work was done when he checked himself into the asylum. And perhaps that's because he was surrounded by people all the time and people were caring for him.
And it was while he was here in the asylum that Van Gogh faced his biggest public test as an artist. In January 1890, he was invited to show his work at an exhibition in Brussels, alongside old friends like Toulouse-Lautrec. Still too ill to attend himself, the painting he chose to send was The Sunflowers.
Vincent was so proud that he'd been selected out of 20 foreign artists to be exhibited in this exhibition.
Not all the artists liked his work. They just didn't respect them.
There was one artist called Henri de Gogh, and he said, "I will not be put by that abominable pot of sunflowers by Vincent." And it caused a fight. Toulouse-Lautrec stood up in honour of his friend and said, "Retract that." And there were almost daggers at dawn. This was the first time the sunflowers had been seen by the general public. They didn't understand why he was painting with such thick paint, such bright colours, so unrealistic.
Perhaps it was for the best that Van Gogh didn't make it there himself. A few months later, wanting to be closer to Theo, he checked himself out of the asylum and took a room above a restaurant in Auvers, a small town just outside Paris. But he was never to recover. On July the 27th, 1890, he packed up his easel and his paints and he went out into the countryside. And in the wheat fields outside the town, in circumstances that remain mysterious, he shot himself.
As soon as Theo knew, straight to his brother, and apparently they were chatting, Theo and Vincent smoked a pipe together, and they were talking, and then he gradually became delirious.
As he lay there, he whispered to his brother, "The sadness will last forever."
He died within a day and a half of shooting himself in Theo's arms.
This painting of farms around Auvers is one of the last that Van Gogh made, and, full disclosure, my own favourite. In it you can just make out 4 solitary sunflowers, an echo perhaps of happier times. Had Van Gogh survived, had he been able to cope with his mental illness, who knows what extraordinary, unpainted masterpieces the world would have today? He was only 37 when he died, and artists often live for a long time, so we might have had another 50 years of Van Gogh as a painter. Who knows what he'd have done next? And yet, had Van Gogh not been self-tortured, had he not been mentally ill, he wouldn't have been Van Gogh, and so we wouldn't have what we do have.
I've always thought that one of the great paradoxes of, tragic paradox of Van Gogh's life is that while he was alive, really nobody could stand him. And that changes actually almost from the moment when he shot himself.
His brother Theo arranged the funeral and invited all the artists to come, and they did do. They took the paintings off of the walls and placed them around his coffin, and they also covered his coffin with flowers, mainly sunflowers. He was much admired. I mean, he truly suffered for his art. He agonized for the art world.
Ever afterwards, he's been a figure that people identify with emotionally, perhaps more than any other artist who's ever lived.
But while Vincent had no success during his life, his family were not prepared for that to go on after his death. And there were people alive who understood quite how extraordinary and beautiful these pictures were. A small platoon determined the whole world would know the name Vincent van Gogh. Less than 2 years before he died at the painfully young age of 37, Vincent van Gogh created one of the most famous works of art the world has seen, his iconic 15 sunflowers. I think there's few people who've heard of the name Van Gogh who aren't aware of his short and tragic life. All around the world, he's known as that artist who cut off his own ear, an act almost as famous as his paintings. It's possible that the drama of his life and the manner in which he left it explain some of the popularity and the mystique surrounding Van Gogh's sunflowers today. But that is only part of the story. So what was it that first brought the sunflowers to the attention of the world? It should have fallen to Theo, Van Gogh's art dealer brother, to make sure he was never forgotten. But he died just 6 months after Vincent, and it was left to Theo's widow, Jo, to carry on Van Gogh's legacy.
She could see what he had, and she knew from Theo that Vincent was a very special artist, and she was very clever at managing the legacy of his work.
She was encouraged by fellow artists to actually show Van Gogh's work, and that's exactly what she did, and she made it her life's mission to show what a great artist he was, even though he was a thorn in her side at times.
Slowly, with Jo's help, Van Gogh's paintings began to win attention. In 1910, just 20 years after his death, Sunflowers was included in a huge exhibition in London. 25,000 people queued to see it, and the British fell in love. The National Gallery couldn't let this painting go and eventually paid £1,300 to buy it from Van Gogh's sister-in-law. More people than ever before finally had access to this extraordinary canvas, and Van Gogh's popularity skyrocketed.
On March the 30th, 1987, which would have been Vincent's 134th birthday, one of the sunflowers was sold at auction, the largest sum ever received for a painting, practically $40 million.
The reserve price had been 12 million, and that in itself was seen to be quite ludicrous. It was suddenly an explosion of interest in Van Gogh. And there, from that moment onwards, he became the painter that he'd always known he could be. He has become one of the world's most highly paid artists. What I find frustrating is that in his own time, he was intensely poor and often on the breadline.
Vincent was so poor, he had to choose at one point between smoking his pipe or eating. And then 134 years after his birth, that a painting of his should sell for $40 million. It's just heartbreaking.
Although it wasn't this Sunflowers that went under the hammer, it was the third in the series, the auction sent people flooding back to the National Gallery to see what all the fuss was about. And ever since then, this slightly mysterious pot of flowers, painted by a Dutchman for a Frenchman in France, has been the single most popular thing in Britain's National Gallery.
He never painted when he was having any kind of mania or any illness. He painted when he was happy. And He did have hope. And most of the time, he was very hopeful, and they portray hope. They portray that hope and that happiness.
It's an ecstatic painting, isn't it, really? It's very joyful, and Van Gogh said that he painted it out of gratitude, but also to provide solace to other people who are suffering loneliness and isolation like himself. He's saying, really, find a connection with the natural world around you. Find this wonder, this beauty that is available in a humble flower.
The explanation behind the popularity of sunflowers is hard to put into words. Ecstatic, joyful, yes. But there's a curious loneliness here as well. Some thrust up. Others wilt and crumple. Some stare back at us, almost like self-portraits. We're instinctively attracted to their beauty, but we are also, all of us, in the end, alone. Van Gogh once said, "I'd like to paint in such a way that everyone who has eyes could understand it." I've used a lot of words in telling this story, but the truth is we don't really need words. We just need our eyes and our hearts. This is a painting for all people and all time. Next time on the world's greatest paintings, a canvas so famous it's been printed on our banknotes. This is by far the most loved image that Turner ever made. We follow one artist's mission.
He explodes onto the British art scene.
To be remembered long after his death.
It's Turner's gift to you from all of those years ago. He painted it for us.
It's J.M.W. Turner's Fighting Temeraire. These are the stories of 10 of the greatest paintings in the world. I'm Andrew Marr. Art, not politics, is the great passion of my life. For me, it gets to the heart of what it is to be human. In galleries across the globe, there are great paintings, works made with almost supernatural skill, fierce passion, and extraordinary brain power. Now I want to tell stories behind some of the most iconic images in history, pictures like Leonardo's Mona Lisa, Van Gogh's Sunflowers, and Turner's Fighting Temeraire, paintings that represent the pinnacle of what people can do with paint and bristles.
He created a brand new way of depicting the world. The colours would fizz and pop on the surface.
It was like you could touch these people. It was like the portrait could speak to you.
Behind every picture, there is a story. I'm going to peel back the layers to find out more about the lives of their creators and the worlds they came from.
There was something about this middle-class Florentine housewife that intrigued him.
Why are these the paintings we all know and love? How were they created? And what makes them the greatest paintings in the world? Here we are in the centre of London, just north of Trafalgar Square, in the National Gallery, one of the great glories of British cultural life, and home to more than 2,000 of the world's finest paintings. Most of the paintings here have come from thousands of miles away, from Italian hill towns, Europe's major cities, and Britain's rural counties. The men and women who created them could never have guessed they'd end up here. But there's one painting hanging in the National Gallery specifically designed for these walls, even if the painter concerned couldn't bear to let it out of his sight during his lifetime. It is, of course, the Fighting Temeraire. It's a haunting image. To the backdrop of a pink, grey, orange sunset chugs a small dark steamer pulling a shimmering pale sailing ship. This is a painting that has captured the imagination of generation after generation. I've sort of lived with this picture for most of my life. One of my schoolrooms when I was a kid had a print of it, and I can remember worrying that the big ship didn't have any sails out, which is kind of the point. I was a little bit thick. Some of you will have done jigsaws of the Fighting Temeraire, others will have eaten biscuits out of tins with the Temeraire on the lid. It's everywhere. But why? What is it about this painting that resonates even now? Well, for starters, it was made by a man that many see as Britain's finest ever artist, Joseph Mallard William Turner. Turner was the kind of artistic superstar of British painting in the early 19th century. He was particularly well known for his seascapes. This was still very much a seafaring country, and Turner was the master painter of all of that. Time and time again, Turner relished saltwater drama, the storms, the heart-stopping moments of wreckage and loss. So why was it this calm, limpid seascape, silent, melancholy, that meant so much to him? So the story of the picture is very, very simple and straightforward. The Temeraire, which had fought with Nelson at Trafalgar, is finally being tugged away to a shipbreaker's yard on the Thames, and she's being taken there by one of the newfangled steam paddleboat tugs that were on the Thames at the time. Turner brought his canvas to life with a flurry of confident brushwork, bold strokes of his palette knife, and even the press of his thumb. Now, these are pretty intimidating walls for any painting to hold its own. Turner's Temeraire is hemmed in on all sides by the greatest works of the greatest painters in the Western canon. And yet, time and again, the Fighting Temeraire is voted Britain's favourite painting. And indeed, it's recognised across the globe as an iconic piece of 19th century art. So, what's the secret of the Fighting Temeraire? To answer that, we have to go back to this painting's origins, because behind the image, so simple and so patriotic, lies another story of class, ambition, and opportunism. A story just as British, but rather more calculated. The story of this painting and the artist who created it may begin just a few hundred yards away from the National Gallery, but a world away from the grand institutions of the high and mighty.
Turner was a Londoner. He was born in a narrow, dark little street called Maiden Lane in Covent Garden, right in the heart of the capital. His father was a wig maker and a barber and had a shop in Covent Garden.
Turner was extremely working class. Nowadays, if your parent had a hair salon in Covent Garden, you'd be living a good life, but not back then. His sister died at the age of 5, and his mother ended up in a mental asylum. But he used to love to draw and paint, and that was his way of finding comfort in a world that was slowly being taken from him with the loss of his family.
Turner's reassurance would always come in the form of brushes, oils, and canvas. Even at this early age, he showed the same passion that would be the driving force behind his Temeraire. His talent, particularly to his father, was obvious from the start.
Because of the shop, the family were brought into the path of some wealthy and influential men, and Mr. Turner Sr. took full advantage of this circumstance. He used his shop as his son's earliest exhibition venue, putting his juvenile watercolours for display and then charging his customers 1 shilling to see them, which might not sound like a lot of money, but 1 shilling is the entrance fee to the Royal Academy, at the time the most prestigious art venue. So it shows just how ambitious he is for his son at this time.
Turner instinctively understood what people wanted, and he was making money from his art, his watercolour landscapes, town scenes and monuments, before he even reached his teens. But this barber's son wanted more.
From the age of 14, which was young even in those days, he was admitted to the Royal Academy for his precocity in painting and drawing. And from the moment he started to exhibit, people loved his work.
It's fair to say he explodes onto the British art scene. His watercolours are the first thing. They're described as miraculous. People can't believe the effects that he manages to achieve in a medium that's very underrated at this time. Almost straight away, it becomes clear that Turner is a star. He is made a Royal Academician at the youngest age ever, only 26 years old.
Right from the beginning, Turner would draw and paint what he knew best. And he was really a child of the Thames. He was born just a stone's throw from the river, and all his life he was obsessed by water. Calm water, dangerous, stormy water, boats, ships, and the British all afloat. This was an artist determined to render the world he was living in, the here and now, directly onto his canvas. Turner was inspired by almost everything around him. And the work he made was different. It was wilder, brighter, more expressive, somehow more urgent. He was pushing the boundaries of what could be done with oil and pigment, and it was making him rich. But although Turner had enjoyed his first delicious taste of acclaim and earned enough money to lift him and his father far from their shop, he wanted much more. He wanted, and which serious artist doesn't, a legacy. He wanted paintings which would live long after he had died. The Fighting Temeraire is one of the most recognizable paintings in the world. But what's the real story behind this evocative image? And why was it quite so important to the artist who created it, J.M.W. Turner? It was certainly the work of a man who had transcended a difficult childhood with extraordinary talent. It was clear, almost as soon as he picked up his first piece of chalk, that Turner was something special. The first part of his life is success upon success upon success. This was an artist who in his 20s had taken London by storm. At just 29, he opened his own gallery and began selling hundreds of paintings every year. His bright, skillful maritime scenes and landscapes couldn't have come from any other hand. And it wasn't just the public that couldn't get enough. In 1807, he was appointed a professor at the prestigious Royal Academy. High, mighty, but Turner wanted higher still. In 19th century London, this was an astonishing rise for a boy from a barber's shop. But although he never lost his Cockney accent and remained proud of his origins all his life, there was one area where his background was causing real trouble for Turner. The man who'd create the Temeraire wanted not just cash and respect in his life, but a legacy. He wanted his painting to outlive him long after his death, and that meant big commissions, and that meant catching the eye of King George IV.
He really, really wanted a royal commission. He wanted the chance to paint something for the king.
He knew he was good, so he was arrogant, really. He believed he was very clever and he wanted people to appreciate what he did.
A lot of people didn't take to Turner. There was a lot of snobbery, and that's probably because of his personality. You know, he didn't hold back, and it wasn't quite the right flavour within genteel company.
And then finally he got the chance he'd been waiting for. George IV was a passionate collector of souvenirs from the Napoleonic Wars, and he was keen for a painting commemorating its most famous sea battle.
Excitingly for him, in 1822, he is commissioned to paint a picture of the Battle of Trafalgar, which is destined for part of a decorative scheme in the state apartments at St James's Palace.
It's now hanging in London's National Maritime Museum. This image is the precursor to Turner's Temeraire, and it delivers on a remarkable scale. The sailors on board are almost miniaturized by Nelson's flagship, the colossal HMS Victory, which dominates the frame. Even Nelson, in the throes of death, is reduced to a matchstick figure, and yet the human drama still packs a mighty punch. For the senior curator here at Greenwich, Quentin Colville, it takes pride of place at his museum.
What you can see here is the height of the Battle of Trafalgar. Nelson's flagship, HMS Victory, is in the foreground, dominating the scene. Around it are clustered other warships, British, French and Spanish, engaged in one of the great naval battles of all time. You can see in this painting that Turner is deeply concerned with the cost of war and the human dimension of the war, which he brings to us through these resilient British sailors in the thick of the fight.
You get a real sense of the sort of the gory details, people falling from the riggings, the shattered masts and the torn sails, but also the bodies in the foreground, drowning hands rising from the bloody waters. That really confronts you.
If this painting was all about winning the favour of the court, Turner had taken some remarkable risks. It really wasn't at all what they'd expected.
The painting attracted a good deal of criticism when it was first unveiled at St James's Palace. One of the things that was commented upon at the time was the way in which perhaps he merged different periods of the battle together. But it was also the details of rigging and masts and spars and signals that had people hot under the collar.
Turner could feel royal approval and perhaps his one and only chance to win it disappearing. His big gamble had failed.
The public wanted something more esteemed, more proper, more respectful. It wasn't what they wanted in terms of a commemorative painting.
George IV was also critical of the painting, and ultimately it did not remain at the place where the commission was intended, St James's Palace, but was given to the Naval Gallery at the Royal Hospital in Greenwich.
Turner got very angry. He felt by then he was the artist. They'd asked him to paint it. They should have let him have free rein, and he painted it in the best way possible. And he didn't want to paint for the king anymore.
Disaster. Turner's attempt to capture a key moment from British history had been consigned to history, and his ability to leave a lasting mark on British art seemed out of reach. He'd had his moment, and he'd blown it.
In particular, the public was struggling with the very bright and vibrant colours that Turner tended to use. They also struggled with this characteristic haziness that many of Turner's later pictures in particular demonstrate. For a contemporary audience who are preconditioned to expect a very high level of detailed finish, this was very problematic. They couldn't read the brushstrokes for the metaphors that they were meant to be for sort of dabs of light. They could only see them as very loose, unfinished, and therefore rough and undesirable patches of paint.
But this working-class barber's son hadn't worked so hard for so long just to fade away. If the way to the public's heart was to give them a ripping yarn, then for his next piece, that's just what he'd do. And in 1838, as he reached the grand old age of 63, a national event gave him what all of us need at some point, a second chance. This is a narrative painting in that it tells a story, and Turner really wanted it to tell a story. In fact, the full title of the painting is The Fighting Temeraire, Tugged to Her Last Berth to be Broken Up, 1838, a specific moment in a specific year. Although the Napoleonic Wars had happened 30 years before, there was a revival of interest in the subject, spurred in part by King George's own fascination with it.
This interest in the Navy manifests itself in several ways, which I think is why it's so interesting. There's a newly cleared area of London just by the Strand, and it was decided to call it Trafalgar Square. At the same time, they decide to have a competition for a monument to go in Trafalgar Square, and that's when the idea for Nelson's column came along. Everyone is not only talking about Nelson and the Battle of Trafalgar, they're talking about the Royal Navy in general.
Nelson mania had well and truly swept the nation.
All of these objects relate either to the Battle of Trafalgar or to the death of Admiral Lord Nelson. And they range across different classes, different groups of income. You can see cheap, mass-produced ceramics like mugs and cups. A very expensive object over here, a crocus planter. Down here, there are children's toys modelled on Nelson's funeral procession.
The names of the great battleships were on everyone's lips: the Victory, the Defiance, the Conqueror, and of course the Temeraire.
They required objects like this to bring the personalities of those who fought, and also the ships themselves, into their sitting rooms, into their lives, into their houses. So these objects were the essential currency for bringing naval glory and valour into people's real worlds.
This had been the biggest conflict of a generation, their Great War, and the commanders and sailors who made up those fleets were still celebrated heroes. This was still very much a maritime naval country, very proud of its navy. What happened to sailors, what happened to ships, was absolutely crucial to the whole country. Turner knew that, and painting that was his great speciality and skill. So when Turner heard that one of the warships, the Temeraire no less, was going to be towed down the Thames on its way to the scrapyard, he knew this could be a very powerful image.
The Temeraire was a symbol of national security. She was a symbol of sea power, a symbol of royal naval might, and people knew that that is what had kept them secure. That is what essentially had won the Napoleonic Wars. And that meant that when a ship was taken away, perhaps captured by the enemy, very rare occasion, or in the case of the Temeraire, dismantled, then there was a real sense of loss and grieving felt by the nation.
The Temeraire, at this stage still known by its naval nickname, the Saucy Temeraire, had had a hugely important role at Trafalgar.
When HMS Victory came under very heavy fire from the French warship Redoutable, it was the Temeraire that came to the Victory's rescue, moving alongside and in fact firing a terrible broadside into the stern of the French warship.
She has then rescued Nelson from losing his ship, and then he has captured another ship, and this is all within the first hour or so of the battle. And it's that story of her which is the basis of her fame.
All warships, in the eyes of their crews, have personality, something distinctive about them in the way that they handle. They provide a role that is not simply one of fighting, but of protecting those who live within them. But beyond that, when they've been connected with great events, like Trafalgar, for instance, they carry a popular appeal. Their name becomes known and travels far and wide.
By September 1838, she was long out of date as a warship. For the past 25 years, she'd been in service on the home front, even being used to house prisoners down in Cornwall. But despite that, she hit headlines across the country when she at last set off for the breaker's yard in Rotherhithe.
That was the largest ship to be broken up. It was taken the furthest along the Thames of any of the warships left over from the Battle of Trafalgar. So it was quite a momentous occasion, and Turner was very good at capturing dramatic moments in the history of his life.
The British came and flocked to see this because you were welcoming home heroes. This wasn't just any old ship, this was a hero. It was very important to the British morale.
That's what's so clever about Turner painting the Temeraire. He was tapping into the spirit of the country at just the moment when, from out of the brick dust and the squalor, Trafalgar Square was beginning to take shape. So he had the glorious popular subject for his painting. But could he do justice to this opportunity? This was the chance to overcome the disappointments of the last decade and leave a lasting legacy. How could one image convey the immense weight of a nation mourning for an era that was about to end? The Fighting Temeraire is much more than simply an attempt to catch a moment in time. By choosing that subject at that period in history, Turner, a man always with one eye on the public mood, was setting himself up for a win. The Napoleonic Wars engulfed a continent in conflict for more than 10 years, climaxing at sea in the bloody clash of the Battle of Trafalgar. So just over 3 decades later, in 1838, Londoners were fascinated by the fate of the Temeraire, that celebrated old warhorse which had fought valiantly in Lord Nelson's fleet. Hundreds of people flocked to see her final voyage.
For most of the population, these warships, these ships that kept them safe at night, they kept the Frenchmen from the door, operated beyond the horizon, often on the other side of the world. And yet here was a chance to actually see one in the flesh. Beautiful wine glass shape of her hull that's all been made by hand by Englishmen in Chatham. So she's a symbol of Britishness, a symbol of British sea power, and she's something to be enjoyed.
It was a massive task to break her down. She'd been built from 5,000 oak trees, which left a lot of wood to be reused.
It's had a real history. We know that sailors left their marks on the gun decks. They left graffiti all over it. So this was not an inanimate object. This is an object that's been inhabited by hundreds of men for years and years and years. It's something that really just breathes history.
It would have been brought for salvage. People wanted souvenirs from it, so the wood would have been used to build houses from it, for example.
If you look closely enough, there are still some clues that reveal the eventual fate of the remains of this iconic ship. Hidden away in Rotherhithe is St Mary's Church. Dating back to 1716, it has a close connection to Britain's seafaring history, and in it are 2 large chairs and 1 altar made from the wood of the broken Temeraire. Father Mark Nichols is the rector here.
This was a very busy part of London, connecting with the Empire. The Navy was built nearby, and the idea, I think, that Turner had about the Temeraire was a link with the past and a change into the modern era. And to have these things here really connects us with our local and national history.
Sir Henry Newbolt wrote a ballad titled The Fighting Temeraire that said, "She's fading down the river, but in England's song forever." Everyone wanted to have a slice of the legacy of this historic ship.
We know that a barometer was made from her wood. We know that a gong stand was made from her wood, a chair, and there's even the story of someone having a wooden leg made out of her wood. And it's nice to think that there are perhaps little pieces of the Temeraire in houses all over London.
The nation had woven the legend of the Temeraire into its past, present, and future. The big question was, how would Turner deliver such a weight of emotion on canvas? He was a very, very aggressive and rivalrous painter. He liked to take on his rivals like Constable and the rest of them and show that he was the best. So whenever Turner produced a special picture like this one, he was making a statement. This is going to knock your socks off. All across this canvas, you can see the creative and even experimental techniques Turner applied to his Temeraire. Some parts are painted with minute precision. The detail on the ship, for example, renders every facet of her hull with fine, flickering strokes. While across the sky, he's used much thicker, almost angry slatherings of paint to bring the canvas to dramatic life. Turner was an obsessive observer of skies, constantly sketching, constantly noting the skies as they changed. Nobody who hadn't done that would have had the confidence to paint something which looks like a hugely glowing, pulsating sunset, and yet when you actually look at the sun itself, the disk of the sun, it's a kind of dirty grey. It's not bright at all. The brightness comes from everywhere else in the picture. Using a technique called scumbling, Turner was able to infuse his dappled clouds with power and texture. He added layer after layer of weak, thin glaze before gently dragging the bright colours of a sunset across his canvas with a heavily laden brush, leaving parts of the underglaze still shining through. Right in the middle of the sunset, you have great lines of dark red and brown, very unexpected when you look at it closely, and yet the overall effect is a completely convincing, pulsating sunset. But while Turner had used his creative talent to depict what had been a real event, this isn't exactly an accurate record of the Temeraire's last voyage. In fact, Turner has used considerable artistic license. He always claimed that he'd seen the ship going by himself as it was going to be broken up, but that cannot be quite true, or if it is, he's deliberately changed what he remembered, because the real Temeraire at this point would have been a poor old wormy hulk, a great lump of rotting wood, not the beautifully accoutred ship that Turner has painted.
So we've got the ship painted looking like a ghost in beautiful white and gold, when actually it was yellow and black. He painted one tug leading it. There would have been two leading it. He moved the tug's funnel to the back so that the billowing smoke is almost heralding the ship behind it. The Temeraire itself has tall masts and some furled sails, which by the time it was being broken up, all that was chopped down to make it easier to be tugged along. So the whole image is fabricated.
He's painted the sunset in that painting, because a sunset in a painting, the narrative is that it's the end of something. Something's coming to close, like it's the end of the day. But the sunset is depicted on the wrong side of the painting. Turner artistically moved it over to the other side of the canvas. And why has he painted the moon in the painting as well at the same time? Well, sometimes you can see the moon in the early morning as well as the sunset. And other people say he painted it to show that time was passing, that it was almost like a funeral march, and slowly going through day and night with the sun and the moon, she was being brought into her final resting place.
The painting is very aesthetically pleasing and beautiful. It's a wonderful study in contrasts. On the one side, you have this beautiful silvery spectral ship illuminated by the moon, very quiet and very understated. And that contrasts beautifully with the explosion of flamboyant, energetic, fiery colour on the other side, the dynamics of the sun rising or setting.
But was this the sun setting on a past era, a Britain before steam? Much has been made of the new technology at the heart of this painting, the steam engine. And Turner must have had a keen sense of the Industrial Revolution, which was then exploding all around him. Could the Fighting Temeraire be about how this new steam power was replacing the customs and the history of old?
On a simple level, it's very easy to read. You don't have to be a historian of 19th century art to be able to unpick the story of the sailing ship being towed by the steamship, and it's about one age passing into another. But that simplicity belies the very complex issues that Turner brings within it. And like all great works of art, it can be interpreted in different ways. So is it celebratory? Is it sad? Is it poignant? I think it's above all an image of hope.
A lot of people said, oh, this is an example of Turner's unhappy with the changing of era where you've got the great wooden walls of the Age of Sail being dragged to their death by steam power. In fact, you realise that one of the most beautifully painted bits of the entire painting is the steamer, it's the tug. And Turner is celebrating that tug. He's celebrating steam power. He's celebrating the new England as much as he's mourning the loss of the old.
But for Turner, it would be the public and the critical response to his painting that would really be crucial. The subject of Turner's most important painting was remaining relevant. But no matter how much he tapped into the public mood, there was a new problem looming on Turner's horizon. That problem was that Turner would be up against a host of contemporaries, all competing for pride of place at the Royal Academy show, the best slot for the most important moment of the year. Turner knew that how his work was received at this prestigious event could make or break its wider reception. But Turner's luck hadn't run out quite yet. By 1839, the Royal Academy had moved into a space in the new National Gallery on the edge of Trafalgar Square. So Turner's painting of a heroic Napoleonic-era warship couldn't have had a better view. And Turner had one final trick up his sleeve. Not only was his painting to be displayed in a location essentially twinned to its subject matter, Trafalgar Story, Trafalgar Square, but Turner was also on the hanging committee that year as well, which meant he could choose the perfect position for his painting. This is an unprecedented tale of luck and good planning. There was literally nothing more that Turner could do. He had created a masterpiece, and to promote it, he had fired off every cannon he had. All he could do now was stand back and wait for the reception. J.M.W. Turner knew that he was painting his masterpiece, The Fighting Temeraire, in the last phase of his artistic life. He was in his mid-60s by the time he'd finished it, and just as the sun was setting in his hard-worked canvas, so it was on his brilliant career. The Royal Academy show could be the last chance to secure his legacy. In 1839, Turner's masterpiece was finally put on display here at the National Gallery in a space reserved for members of the Royal Academy for everyone to see. Alongside it, Turner placed an altered extract from Thomas Campbell's poem, Ye Mariners of England, which read, "The flag which braved the battle and the breeze no longer owns her."
It's a combination of perfect factors. Turner's own very specific painterly style, the subject matter that he's best known for, but also this moment in time, the ethos that he's trying to capture. And above all, it is a picture about Britain. You look at the painting and you see a British ship. It's on a British river, the River Thames, the symbol of London. And of course, we also have the other great symbol of the nation at the time, the steamer, part of the age of steam, the Industrial Revolution, of which Britain is a world leader. Things which are important to the national agenda are encapsulated within this picture.
But would it be the hit that Turner craved? The answer is an emphatic yes. The Victorian public went crazy for it.
Turner's painting was rapturously received. If you read the reviews of his painting, people are realising they're actually seeing something that's never been done before. He's a genius, he's an innovator, and he's creating something fundamentally new.
People flocked to see it out of respect, not just to the painting, but to the history and to the members of their family that they'd lost. It was seen as majestic.
The Fighting Temeraire is universally beloved, and it's almost as though he's reached the epitome of his career with the Temeraire. It encapsulates all of the things that he's been working towards during his career.
The London that Turner grew up in might have been changing fast, and the country that had once embraced him as its finest artist might have started to look to the next generation coming up through the Academy. But just for this moment, old Turner had the nation in his hands. He was a patriotic man. The Temeraire was his personal tribute to the country he loved, And perhaps that's why, for the rest of his life, Turner never let this painting out of his sight.
Turner liked it so much, he had a pet name for it. He called it his darling, which I think is really sweet.
The love of Turner's life was the Fighting Temeraire. He didn't want to sell it, and when he was offered a cheque for £5,000, he still refused to sell it.
It's almost as much as the ship itself was sold for, and Turner turns this amount of money down. And even when he's offered a blank cheque, he still refuses to part with the picture. So clearly he recognises that this is a statement of a great importance for him as an artist.
Although Turner remained one of the most famous artists in England until his death, by the late 1830s, a new wave of younger painters were superseding him. And it hurt when his own evolving technique after the Temeraire, his radical old age, went unappreciated.
As time went on, he painted fewer details, more impasto, thicker paint, quicker brush marks, more of the atmosphere than the actual place. And quite a few people criticised this. They said, these aren't paintings. And he was angry, he was furious because he knew what he was doing and he was just moving art on. He'd done that at the beginning of his life. He'd painted the detailed works. Now he was painting atmosphere and light.
Turner had not devoted his entire life to art just to be forgotten, and towards the end of his life, he made sure that neither he nor his paintings would fade into obscurity.
He wanted to leave a legacy for Britain, and he wrote in his will that he wanted all his works kept together and shown together.
Turner was obsessed with his legacy, and the last few years of his life, he made absolutely certain that his paintings were in the locations he wanted them to be in, framed in the way he wanted them framed, so they could be appreciated by the public in the way he wanted his paintings to be appreciated.
Turner died in his house on the banks of the Thames, the river he'd loved all his life, at the age of 76, on the 19th of December, 1851.
Turner's funeral was organised by his fellow academicians. His body lay in state in his gallery, and then it was taken and interred in no less a place than St Paul's Cathedral. I mean, what greater endorsement for national heroism is there? And you can find him there in the crypt today, lying next to Sir Joshua Reynolds, the first president of the Academy, which I think would have pleased Turner greatly, and also not that far from Lord Nelson.
They're lying almost side by side, and it wouldn't surprise me if he'd particularly asked for that to happen.
His will stipulated that the entire contents of his studio be left to the nation. That's nearly 300 oil paintings and more than 30,000 drawings and sketches, of which the most important is, of course, the Fighting Temeraire.
If you go and look at the Fighting Temeraire now in the National Gallery, it's Turner's gift to you from all of those years ago. So it hasn't been kept hidden away in the hands of a private collector. He painted it for the nation, he painted it for us.
Turner's name is as secure today as it was back then. If we see a particularly colourful, flamboyant, sun-drenched sky, we call it a Turner sunset, and I think that ties very clearly back to the fame of the Temeraire.
We love the Fighting Temeraire because it's a part of our history where we were heroic, where we defeated the enemy. It was not only Turner's darling, it was our darling.
There's only one place to end this story, and it's, of course, back here in the National Gallery, where Turner's darling is displayed permanently, just as he always wanted. Now, if this was simply disguised autobiography, we wouldn't love it so much. The truth is that Georgian Britain, the country that had fought the Napoleonic Wars, was not simply vanishing into the sunset, or if it was, then a new Britain, the much more vigorous, industrial, imperial, Victorian Britain, symbolised by that tugboat, was about to emerge. Yet there's no getting away from it. This is a fundamentally backward-looking, nostalgia-soaked image, and its popularity makes me ask, are we British basically still children of the sunset rather than of the dawn? Whether we are or not, we remain vigorously commercial and money-grubbing, which allows me to end this film in a way that Joseph, Mallard, William Turner would have been delighted with. Because here is the new British £20 note. And look who's on it. Yes, it's Turner. And look what's on it. Yes, it's the Fighting Temeraire. This is by far the most famous and the most loved image that Turner ever made. That sun may be low in the sky, but it has not set for nearly 200 years. Next time, there are people who think that great art should be like a warm bath. This is more like a barbed wire face mask. How one of the darkest events in Spanish history.
It's the catastrophe which alerts us to what modern warfare was going to look like.
Met a prolific artist's complicated love life.
He referred to women as either goddesses or doormats and weeping machines.
It could only be Pablo Picasso's Weeping Woman. These are the stories of 10 of the greatest paintings in the world. I'm Andrew Marr. Art, not politics, is the great passion of my life. For me, it gets to the heart of what it is to be human. In galleries across the globe, there are great paintings, works made with almost supernatural skill, fierce passion, and extraordinary brain power. Now I want to tell stories behind some of the most iconic images in history, pictures like Leonardo's Mona Lisa, Van Gogh's Sunflowers, and Turner's Fighting Temeraire, paintings that represent the pinnacle of what people can do with paint and bristles.
He created a brand new way of depicting the world. The colours would fizz and pop on the surface.
It was like you could touch these people. It was like the portrait could speak to you.
Behind every picture, there is a story. I'm going to peel back the layers to find out more about the lives of their creators and the worlds they came from.
There was something about this middle-class Florentine housewife that intrigued him.
Why are these the paintings we all know and love? How were they created? And what makes them the greatest paintings in the world? Success in the modern world of art is not found in the small details. It's measured by scale of ambition, by price at auction, and your media profile. In short, size matters. This is Tate Modern, the triumphant monster among contemporary art galleries. And with nearly 6 million visitors a year, it's in the top 10 most visited galleries and museums all around the world. So, in a colossal space like this, it's entirely right that we find a hugely important painting by a giant of modern art whose fame is on an equally vast scale. When asked to name the world's most famous painter, more than 90% of us choose him. His paintings are so utterly distinctive that when you see this one whole, there is no question about who painted it. This could only be by one person, Pablo Picasso. It's his Weeping Woman, painted in 1937, and nothing quite like it had ever been made before. Once seen, however briskly, never forgotten. This is one of the most unforgettable of the many remarkable images that Picasso made during an immense career that dominates the art world of the 20th century.
For a picture so strong it almost jabs you in the eyes, it's really quite small. And the subject could hardly be simpler. A woman wearing a red hat is crying. She's holding a handkerchief, and she is so grief-stricken, she's more or less chewing it.
It's deceptively simple, even cartoon-like. Her face has been shaped using thick black lines and painted using a striking combination of bright acid colours and much darker reds and blues. This is a woman in torment, racked with wrenching anguish.
If you look at Picasso's treatment of her face, the tears are like little raindrops or jewels, and her face is marked in grief, almost as if she's been clawed by a tiger, those deep, deep gouges and scratches in blue on the face. You very rarely see visible teeth in portraits, and the teeth are there, again, emphasizing the ugliness almost of grief. Now, this is a very powerful image, but as a Picasso painting, it's not exactly unusual. He was a very prolific artist. It's said that every single day of his working life, Picasso made at least 3 things. And of those things, 10,000 or more were paintings. So what makes this, amongst those 10,000, quite so special?
Well, this is an image painted at an important hinge in the artist's life, when a horrific event in Spanish history arrived at a tumultuous moment in Picasso's complicated love life.
To really understand this picture properly, we need to go back more than 100 years to the story of the young Picasso, an arrogant, cocky young man determined to take the entire art world by storm.
For an arrogant, cocky young man who wanted to make his name, there was only one destination. Even from the earliest years of his life in Spain, where he was born in 1881, the place that drew this prodigious talent like a magnet was Paris.
Anyone that wanted to be a serious artist had to learn about art seriously, and that was happening in Paris. And all the galleries as well, the Louvre, Musée d'Orsay, beautiful Arc de Triomphe. People flocked to Paris.
And for a young man like Picasso, there were, let's say, other attractions when he finally arrived in 1900, aged all of 19.
There were the bars, the brothels. It was fun, it was inspiring, and it was the place to be.
There was this kind of bohemian mix which was going on in Paris.
It attracts artists, they meet and socialize. But most importantly, they are debating the future of art. They are innovating together, they are taking risks.
I think Picasso was there just exactly at the right time.
The main influences during the early part of his time in Paris were stars of the previous generation, like Renoir and Toulouse-Lautrec. Like them, Picasso painted the world he saw around him in Montmartre, the beggars, bohemians, musicians and dance halls. But to get noticed, he had to show them in radically new ways.
This is where Picasso learns to be an artist. It's a place where he can really flower, where he can really develop, and of course experiment. And the outcome of these experiments are some of the most important and significant developments in modern art in the 20th century.
One of the greatest of his breakthrough works was the almost ugly and still shocking The Ladies of Avignon, or Demoiselles d'Avignon.
The Demoiselles d'Avignon was probably the most important painting of the first half of the 20th century. Picasso paints it in 1907. It's a brothel scene.
It's drawn from his own memories of visiting a brothel in Barcelona when he was a young man living there.
Picasso drew on his latest enthusiasm, African tribal art, and wrenched apart the rules of painting that had dominated Western art for centuries. But even that isn't what really unsettles the viewer. It's the blatant, unashamed animal directness of the brothel girls in their pain. Picasso has turned his back on the beauty and tenderness traditionally associated with nudes.
And you're looking at them sometimes from very multiple angles. So you can see a woman's buttocks and then they're twisted round and you can see her inner thigh. And you get this kind of very intimate but quite brutalized view both of woman but also of humanity.
We're looking at 5 women who do not sit there or stand there passively averting their gaze from the male viewer, but rather they return the gaze with this power, with this extraordinary confidence and sexuality. And this is what made the painting so disarming.
Most who stood in front of it weren't sure where to look. Picasso's great rival Matisse first thought it was a bad joke.
Matisse actually hated Les Demoiselles d'Avignon. He said that Picasso would be found hanged behind the work because it was so bad.
It shocked some of his other friends, and it wasn't shown for a long time because it was regarded as so revolutionary, so kind of brutal, so powerful.
The small coterie of Picasso's friends and admirers seized on this innovation, this moment, and understood and appreciated that art could never be the same again.
Everybody knows that something dramatic has changed and you have to paint your way through it or you have to reject it, but you have to face up to it.
Nowadays, many people argue that that picture was the real beginning of modern painting. But there's an enormous gap between Les Demoiselles d'Avignon and the raw emotional power of Weeping Woman. And to pursue Picasso on that journey, we have to delve deeper into his tangled emotional life and also visit one of the darkest and grimmest episodes in modern Spanish history.
Picasso's Weeping Woman nods to everything he's best known for: unique methods, jolting colours, and of course the radical artistic style he personally invented. To understand the genius of this canvas, first, you need to understand cubism.
The great discovery or invention of cubism, which Picasso and Georges Braque invented together just before the First World War, is that artists can see the world entirely differently. Instead of viewing it as a single flat plane in front of them from one perspective, you can bring different perspectives into the same picture.
In this 1918 still life by Picasso, he paints a table on which are strewn a guitar, playing cards, a bottle, pieces of table, half-hidden shadows. They're fragmented and jumbled up across the canvas like a broken jigsaw. Breaking reality down in order to build it up again is central to the idea of cubism.
You can, as it were, look around objects and behind them and emphasize their basic shapes. So you've got cylinders and globes and curves and lots of shadows. And by doing that, you see the world differently. Something as boring and banal as a bottle on a table or possibly a guitar suddenly looks interesting again for the very first time.
Picasso revolutionized the way people looked at a canvas. It was a skill he would bring to all his most important works, and one which made him fabulously wealthy. By the 1920s, Picasso was an A-list celebrity. He was living his personal dream in a thrilling city, throbbing with excitement and opportunity.
He just became richer and richer. He could do no wrong. The more he painted, the more ideas he had, and he had a lot of ideas, the more his work sold. He became extremely wealthy very quickly.
Picasso was at the peak of his powers, his confidence and productivity overflowing. But while he was driven by everything going on in his creative world, there was one place he looked for inspiration more than most.
Picasso loved women. He loved them around. They made him feel good. As a man who was 5'4" and not particularly handsome, women flocked at his feet. Why? Because the time that they were with him, he made them feel special.
He has many love affairs. He's very charismatic. He's identified early on as a great, enormous talent. He's very seductive, and he has many relationships with women who become his muses, the inspiration, a source of kind of rejuvenation to him.
He referred to women as either goddesses or doormats and weeping machines. And it's extraordinary how they stayed with him and they fought over one another for his love. And he depicted them time and time again.
Every important work in Picasso's collection, including The Weeping Woman, was inspired by one of his ever-changing cast of lovers. But there were some who meant much more than others. One with whom he had a very long relationship and a daughter was Marie-Thérèse Walter. Her and Picasso's grandson is Olivier.
My grandfather, Pablo Picasso, met my grandmother, my future grandmother, Marie-Thérèse, in 1927, in January, in front of the Galeries Lafayette. She was in the shop, he was looking at her through the window, and he waited outside, and when she came out, he said, "Hello, mademoiselle, I am Picasso, and I would like to make a portrait of you." So she was surprised because she had no clue who Picasso was. But she said that he was a charming man with a beautiful red tie, and this is how the story started. Marie-Thérèse was 17 years old. She was a perfect model for Pablo. She was innocent, and he was like a teacher. And step by step, she became totally addicted to this beautiful little love life.
Marie-Thérèse was the latest in what was a rather long line of women whose character and looks inspired the by now world-famous Picasso to paint and draw furiously. But being his muse wasn't a poetic fate.
Being Picasso's muse was not all it was cracked up to be. You might think, oh, but great, you're living the high life and you're in one of his beautiful villas and being taken out to bars and clubs. But it was a short-lived occupation. You had to be on call, hand and foot, 24/7. There may have been two of you on the go at the same time, and you may not have known about the other one. And it was hard work. You would have to pose for him. You would have to satisfy him. You would have to make sure that he was happy, that he was watered and fed. It was almost like looking after a child.
Away from his studio on the Rue des Grands Augustins, and after nearly 10 contented and prolific years with Marie-Thérèse, Picasso finally began to find that his creative motor was running on empty.
He'd had two very, very difficult years where he'd almost decided to give up painting altogether and become a poet. And in fact, he joked that on his tombstone he would like to have Pablo Picasso, poet, one-time painter.
But there was new inspiration on the horizon. In 1936, Picasso was at the Café Les Deux Magots, a chic and happening hotspot for Parisian intellectuals and artists, when he was introduced to a woman called Dora Maar, who would eventually be the model for Weeping Woman.
He saw this sophisticated lady seated here. She was playing with a very pointed knife, and she was jabbing with the knife between her spreaded fingers, and sometimes she was missing the target. So there was a lot of blood on her hand, and Pablo was fascinated. She was a photographer, she was an artist, she was a painter, and was far from the situation with Marie-Thérèse, the sweet Marie-Thérèse. The relationship became immediately like intense.
His newest lover, a political artist herself, opened Picasso up to the dark truths about the age they were living through. He began to think afresh and to work afresh.
And he needs something different. And certainly in the 1930s, when he encounters Dora Maar, he really needed somebody who was dark, deep, a woman who was highly intelligent, creative.
Dora Maar was really as much of an artist as Picasso was, but because she was a woman and it wasn't the #MeToo time, she didn't have her chance.
In these two portraits, we can see just how starkly their different characters impacted on his painting. In 1932's The Dreamer, Marie-Thérèse is presented lying back in a post-coital reverie. Curving, overtly sexual forms are rendered in colourful, lush, thick, soft pastel colours. She's a dance of sensual wobble. By contrast, Dora looks back at us in a more challenging way. She blazes with personality. At her ear, drinking from her mind, is a bee, which some suggest may be Picasso himself. This same bee would reappear in Weeping Woman, feeding on a tear. Red fingernails, like that bloodied knife, match the challenging pout of her mouth, and she's all acidic colours and angularity, not cuddly, but incisive. So it's unsurprising that it's Dora who would now change the way that Picasso thought and painted.
Picasso thought that she was extraordinary. She was gutsy, she was fiery, she was not afraid, and he found that very attractive.
It was at the height of his affair with the more mature and challenging Dora, early in 1937, that Picasso was asked to paint something for the Paris International Exhibition, a huge art show opening that summer.
He accepts the commission, and it's going to have to be pretty fast because it has to be finished by June. And the evolution of the painting is quite strange because Picasso has absolutely no idea for the first 2 or 3 months what he's going to do.
Picasso struggles. He got this kind of block.
It was Dora who got him out of his creative hole. In April 1937, she pushed a report about a wartime atrocity under his nose.
It was Dora Marr who brought Pablo's newspaper showing that a village in Spain has been attacked by German planes, dropping bombs everywhere. I've seen the article in the newspaper, so the description was horrible.
First pictures from the Basque Republic of the holy city of Guernica, scene of the most terrible air raid our modern history yet can boast. Hundreds were killed here, men, women, and children. 4,000 bombs were dropped out of a blue sky into a hell that raged unchecked for 5 murderous hours.
Picasso's homeland was being torn apart by a bitter civil war, pitching nationalists against republicans. The nationalists were helped by the Nazi and Italian fascist forces, who had decimated Guernica, largely, it seems, out of mere curiosity to see what a large-scale air raid could do. The attack had no strategic purpose.
They come in, saturation, bombing, sucking the oxygen out, and totally destroying the city.
70% of the city was destroyed, and 1/3 of the population was wiped out.
The first time that there has been bombing of that scale in Europe. It's the catastrophe which alerts us to what modern warfare was going to look like.
Reading about Guernica, Picasso was incensed, and he knew he'd found the subject for his Paris exhibition mural.
He said and believed that art is the lie that told the truth, and he wanted the world to know. And Picasso was such a big, majestic superstar now in the art world that he felt that the only way to communicate the truth was through art, because art communicates better than any language, and it breaks down language barriers.
The work he painted furiously in just a few weeks, the precursor to his Weeping Woman, is called simply Guernica. It now hangs in Madrid's Reina Sofia, where more than 4 million people come to see it every single year. Manuel Borja Virel is the museum's director.
He had many photographs of bombings in Spain. We know that he was looking at the newsreels, we know he was looking at the newspaper, and he's trying to understand this period and using media of the period, but through the tools of a painter. So that's why the painting is black and white, which is the color of the newsreels.
This lack of colour gives added impact to a canvas full of writhing, screaming, dying people and animals, rendered in flattened cubist caricature.
He reacts with this painting to all these horrors. He reacts also to a new type of violence, the fact that the murder of a complete population could be done in a kind of administrative way.
In 1937, Picasso's mother wrote to him from Barcelona. She described how smoke from the burning city was making her eyes water. And it was this image of a crying woman in a devastated city that then began to play on his mind. In this painting, that distraught woman is a hugely powerful figure. The real-life model for this and the Weeping Woman was Dora. As Picasso worked, Dora was constantly at his side, photographing his progress. She even added the flex on the horse's flank herself.
We see that the tongue, that the scream of the woman could be like an arrow against the bombs, an arrow against the monstrosity, and also the breast. In many cases, they are like bombs, and the top of the breast is like the fuse of the bomb. So what he's telling us is that there is an element of resistance and an element that will be able, through poetry, through the communality of the suffering, overcome the barbarity of the monstrosity of the war.
The bombing of Guernica and his relationship with Dora, a woman in so many ways his equal, changed everything for Picasso. Up to this point, his paintings had centered around Planet Pablo. Now he was making a political statement. It packed a punch, but it did not land him much instant acclaim.
When the painting was first presented in 1937, I mean, of course, there was a group of people that thought it was great, but many people didn't like it. For some avant-garde artists, this was too much of a billboard. This was too much of a propaganda element. On the other hand, many people thought it was too abstract. So in a way, Guernica was caught between the people that thought it was too obvious and the people that thought it was too abstract.
In time, this canvas would find a significant place in the world, but for now, Picasso was restless.
Although his great anti-war masterpiece was now finished, Picasso was transfixed by the sufferings of the Spanish, and in particular, that idea of the tears running down the face of his own mother. That became in his head the simplest of images, a weeping, desolate woman.
And this was the figure he now needed to immortalize. Pablo Picasso's Weeping Woman is a powerful image of the Spanish Civil War. Having completed and then exhibited his large-scale anti-war canvas, Guernica, he spent weeks obsessively painting and sketching the same tearful woman over and over again, a woman inspired by his mother and modelled on his lover, Dora Maar. This one, his final and widely considered his best, was completed in just a few days.
When you get up close and personal with this picture, one of the things you notice very quickly is the thickness of the paint. Now, this is interesting because a lot of the time at this period, Picasso paints quite thinly. He puts great washes of colour, and the paint is really there to serve the drawing, not the other way around. This is different. At times, he's put on so much paint, it's almost on the edge of falling off the canvas. That is interesting because it just shows how hard he was working on this picture. This is a picture he sweated over and worked again and reworked and reworked and reworked until for him it was absolutely perfect.
And the sweaty intensity of that physical effort really amplifies his hugely bold choice of colours.
What he's done is he's used all the warm, generous colours, the reds and the golds and the yellows and the oranges, but he's pushed them to the back of the picture plane. They're the wall behind the girl, they're the red carpet on which she's standing. Her own face is painted almost entirely in cold, cold colours, lots of white, lots of icy blue, lots of cold, acidic greens. So he's making the desolation vivid through the colours and the choice of colours. It has the raw urgency, not of an academic painting, but of a piece of graffiti in the New York Underground. Brilliant graffiti, I grant you. Picasso is using cubist distortion, not to show off a new way of seeing or painting, but to show that he, as a modern painter, can represent human desolation and sorrow as emotionally and effectively as any of the great masters of the High Renaissance.
This powerful image had a profound effect on an old and close friend of Picasso's. An artist and voracious collector of modern art, Roland Penrose, was visiting Pablo Picasso when he saw it in his studio. He was blown away by the painting's savagery and its power, and even though the paint was barely dry, he asked if he could buy it.
Roland Penrose wanted it. He was desperate to have that painting. And I think it's a recognition, really, of the closeness of their friendship that he allowed Roland to buy it from him.
Picasso sold it to him for £284, £19,000 in today's money. In the back of Penrose's mind were the germs of an idea. He could send it out on a tour with Picasso's first anti-war masterpiece.
He organised both Guernica and Weeping Woman to go around and be shown as a way of highlighting the plight of the people of the Spanish Civil War.
It was really an attempt to alert and raise money by touring this extraordinary work. First of all, it starts in London in the Burlington Galleries, just off Bond Street. And it's not a huge success, but it is supported by people like Virginia Woolf and E.M. Forster, and who give subscriptions to showing it. And it visits other towns. I think it goes to Sheffield. And then it comes back to London, to the Whitechapel.
And 15,000 people come to see the painting. It is opened by Clement Attlee, the leader of the opposition, leader of the Labour Party and subsequent Prime Minister. And it's a great rallying call for the working class in the East End to support the Republican cause in Spain. And apparently, the ticket price was a pair of boots to donate to soldiers and workers in Spain who are facing this fascist onslaught.
Picasso's first political works had finally made their mark, 580 miles from the atrocity they portrayed. When the now triumphant tour was over, Penrose took Weeping Woman back to the home he shared with his wife, the photographer Lee Miller, and their son Anthony. He still has very strong memories of the man who painted it, his father's great friend, the now middle-aged Picasso.
When Picasso came here in 1950, he immediately liked it. He felt very at home. He liked the animals on the farm. And he liked things like plum pudding and stuff like that that my mother gave him to eat, and Scotch whiskey. He was very keen on that.
At the time, Anthony was just a child.
Well, I was instantly drawn to Picasso because he had this incredible warmth and friendliness and this capacity to really engage with me as a child. We invented a game. I was the bull, and it was my job to put my horns on and charge across the room and try and knock Picasso over, but he was so quick on his feet that he'd jump out of the way at the last minute, and I would go splat into the wall, and I got fed up with going splat into the wall, so I thought of a different strategy. And I watched and waited, and when he wasn't looking, I crept up and I bit him. And he bit me right back. And in the moment before I started to yell, my mum heard him say, "Huh, that's the first Englishman I've ever bitten."
Picasso's Weeping Woman also left its mark on the young Anthony.
I guess I must have been about 8 years old, and I asked my mum, "Why is the lady crying?" And she said, "The lady used to live in a town called Guernica. And one day, without any warning at all, airplanes came over and started dropping bombs, and they killed lots of people, and they set fire to the whole place, and they might have even killed her little boy." It gave me an enduring fascination with what was behind that painting. If you look at the woman's eyes, you can see what appear to be the silhouettes of airplanes. Now, she'd probably never, ever seen an airplane in her life before, and suddenly they were there droning through the sky and dropping bombs and killing everybody. That image would have been seared into her retina, if you like, forever. We can see that she is absolutely distraught.
That anger, that pain is what makes Weeping Woman so unforgettable. Now, there are people who think that great art should be like a warm bath, calm and reassuring, a kind of ointment for the pains of daily life.
But it seems to me that if art is great, it ought to be able to represent all of human life, and that means the pain and the anger and the sorrow as well. An ointment, a warm bath, this is more like a barbed wire face mask.
The Weeping Woman was an extraordinary painting to have on the walls of Penrose's London flat, and it had been part of their lives for more than 30 years when the next page turned in the remarkable story of this painting. Roland and his wife Lee were at home in their Sussex farmhouse in April 1969 when they got a phone call.
It was my father's housekeeper from the apartment in London. And she was distraught. She was sobbing into the phone. The place had been broken into. The whole place had been trashed. The thieves had stolen absolutely the cream of the crop. There were several Picassos. There were, of course, some really important works. But the star of them all was the Weeping Woman. She had gone. My parents were absolutely devastated. They didn't have those paintings in their lives because of the monetary value. They had them there because of their importance as works of art, and to have them taken away, it was like a bereavement. It was a really shattering loss.
Picasso's great and troubling portrait had vanished, if not into thin air, then certainly into the grey London smog.
By coincidence, the Metropolitan Police had just established a specialist art theft squad who are now on the case, and a reward worth nearly £500,000 in today's money was offered.
The investigation into the theft went on for quite a long time and not much happened. But then the police found an informer who pretended to be a go-between between Roland and the thieves. And the police were tailing him when the thieves took him to where the paintings were hidden. It was in a shop in South London. Unknown to anybody, that day, a demolition team had moved in to tear down the shop and give it a makeover. So the thieves saw what was going on, and they just went straight on past, and the police were following them, went straight on past, and the whole thing came to nothing.
It seemed as if this great painting about loss might itself be lost forever. Picasso's Weeping Woman is one of the artist's earliest and most powerful pieces of political propaganda. An image of a distraught woman which speaks to us as powerfully today as the year she was painted in response to a wartime atrocity.
But in 1969, after more than 30 years as part of a private collection, hanging unseen in a London flat and frankly forgotten by the wider world, this extraordinary painting was stolen right off the wall.
The Penrose family were terrified that Weeping Woman had disappeared forever. A major police sting operation had failed dismally, and unknown to all but the thieves, the paintings were hidden in a shop which was about to be gutted.
Two of the workmen were tasked with clearing out all the junk, and they went into the basement and they pulled out the works, and one of them said, "Oh, it's all rubbish, burn it." And the other one, he thought, might be a bob's worth in this. And so he took the Weeping Woman to an artist's materials shop. They saw that it was hand-painted in oils and it was signed Picasso, so they thought it might be important. And they called the police. And of course, all hell broke loose in that moment.
Stolen from under their noses and coming perilously close to being dumped in a bin, Weeping Woman was finally back, safe and sound.
My father went to Chelsea police station, where they were all stacked up in a cell for safekeeping. And he said, for the first time in his life, he wept for joy to see them all back and safe.
The responsibility of owning such a painting could not have been made any clearer, and in 1987, Anthony's father gave Weeping Woman to the Tate, and she's been there ever since.
She's meant to be out there, telling people about the atrocity of war.
For the first time in half a century, Picasso's masterpiece was on public display. People flocked to see it and experience for themselves just how remarkable she is.
It's very bold, it's very powerful, and of course, intensely sad. And I think you get almost the feeling of the emotion of her.
The painting, I think, is universally moving, and that's Picasso's brilliance, that's his achievement. He's able to take the particularity of that story of these poor civilians bombed from the air, terrified, injured, suffering, and make this very personal, private painting that speaks of kind of universal pain and grief, that eruption of sorrow that cannot be constrained.
I think it embodied everything that people understood about that whole era and the tragedies that occurred, not just in the Spanish Civil War, but also in World War II.
By the time Picasso died on the 8th of April 1973, he was the most influential artist of the 20th century. His Weeping Woman is a hugely important part of his legacy. But what about the woman who inspired the painting? Picasso's relationship with Dora Maar lasted until the 1940s, when he dumped her for his next muse.
Dora had, I think, a nervous breakdown after the relationship with Picasso finally collapsed.
Picasso felt very guilty. She always said it wasn't because of him, but he felt guilty. He bought her a house, and she more or less lived on her own for the rest of her life.
Weeping Woman is actually the best painting of Dora Maar because it showed her true soul, and I can imagine her weeping like that almost daily towards the end of her relationship and thereafter over Picasso.
Of course, if you get too close to the sun, you get burnt. And that was the tragedy, in a sense, of Dora. And of course, the power of his presence in the art world and the art scene would mean that she would be overshadowed for a huge amount of time.
No longer. Marr is herself today celebrated as a very important artist, and her relationship with Picasso was about much more than its ending. Weeping Woman is testament to that.
Weeping Woman is a tremendously important image because it's a universal image that we can all relate to. It's a picture that talks about suffering. And unfortunately, at one time or other, we are all used to suffering.
I've known this painting for a long time, but I'd never realized before just how political it is. And I'm not just talking about the Spanish Civil War, I'm talking about relations between men and women. They say the personal is political, and that was certainly the case for Pablo Picasso. The Weeping Woman is as powerful today as she has ever been. There are plenty of paintings, perfectly well made, which somehow become limp and lifeless over time. And there are other paintings which radiate energy and become more alive and draw us in as time goes on. This picture crackles and fizzes with energy. It is impossible to be in the presence of the Weeping Woman and ignore her. And if you're looking for a definition of a great painting, that is about as clear as you can get.
Next time, the final masterpiece of a truly iconic artist.
People come into these rooms for that sense of serenity, and they walk out feeling calm and reassured about the world.
This is the story of personal tragedy.
He became so depressed that he stopped painting.
Brutal violence.
He could hear the fighting, he could hear the bombs. So many young soldiers were killed.
And insatiable obsession. behind Claude Monet's Water Lilies.